PLD PJ Campbell. Two mediocre white dudes on film. Because frankly, we know you don't have enough of that in your life. So we're here to give you more. And without further ado, here are two mediocre white dudes on film. We're back. We're bad. You're white. I'm mad.
I knew you were going to do that before you even started because I was thinking about that joke all morning and trying to figure out a way to do it. And I was like, I don't feel like being canceled today if I say it wrong and someone feels like I said something wrong. And then you did it. So I get out of a jail-free card for that. And I'm okay with that.
Luckily, I didn't do it wrong. I tried that line well enough that I think we'll be okay.
Yeah, I really appreciate that a lot. It's funny. I was actually, is it yesterday? I was talking about Bill and Ted, and it like went down the rabbit hole of, Bill and Ted 2 is great because they're like, get the villain from Lethal Weapon 2 and just put him in here to do whatever he wants to do while we make a movie with killer robots and that are like evil. Bill and Ted 2 is wild. There's a franchise I would not mind doing down the line.
You know what? I could see myself. You wouldn't have to too much to do that. Twist my arm a little bit. That'd be about it. I mean, not even that, to be honest with you.
Yeah, just the thing I've been thinking about because I'm like, man, there's a lot to talk about with the Bill and Ted movies. I mean, Bill and Ted 2 is one of the great sequels because it just flies in the face of everything that the original movie is, where, it's two dudes who are just off trying to finish a school project, and the second one's like, yeah, but let's kill them off, like evil robot versions of them kill them, and we're going to send them to heaven and hell and purgatory. And you're like, I'm sorry, what the fuck is happening? And this is all so that they can get into the Battle of the Bands. It's incredible.
It is absolutely a masterpiece of some sort. Is the best way to put that. I do love that one quite a bit. And there's a lot of movie franchises that I look forward to discussing with you on here. Although I've been kind of trying to stop thinking about it because obviously after our venture into Indiana Jones, which is ending soon, and then we get to the John Wick franchise with 4 films. Then we start a Friday the 13th, and that's going to take us a long time to get through. That's going to take us all the way through to probably about March of next year. Which
to be fair, we could really just take a lot of the points of every podcast and just like re-edit an episode, and it would probably sound a little similar. To get away with it. No, I would never say that. I love all those movies. I'm like very excited to actually sit down and talk about them because you know how much I love Jason and the Friday the 13th films.
And that was one of the things we built our entire podcast on. Obviously, we wanted to skewer towards horror because we both love horror, and it was definitive from the beginning. We're going to do the big 3: the Halloweens, the Friday the 13th, and Nightmare on Elm Street. And even though I know you're not as big on Nightmare as the other two, like I am as big on the Nightmare, it feels good that we're going to get the second out of the big 3 done. We get the Halloween franchise done. We'll do our Friday the 13th saga. We'll still wait a bit. Because we want to wait a bit between the big franchises like that. And then we'll eventually get to Nightmare. We'll have all 3 of the big ones done at that point. And that should be a lot of fun to get through.
Yeah. And I mean, we've been doing other ones too, because like obviously we did The Conjuring, which, if any of you didn't catch it, they dropped the trailer for The Nun 2 yesterday, the 9th film in the Conjuring franchise. And I gotta say, man, that's a damn good trailer.
It looked great. I actually got to see it on the big screen last night too. It was in front of
did you?
Insidious Red Book had it in front. I was like, I just saw this trailer earlier. Unfortunately, earlier I'd seen it on my phone because I had no other choice. That's just where I was when it dropped. I didn't want to wait. So I got to see it on the phone, but it was like a fine version of it. But then I got to see it on the big screen, and it was even better on the big screen. So I can't wait for that movie to come out. We both are bigger fans of The Nun than a lot of people are. If you go back to that episode, we appreciate a lot of what that episode that film did. So a sequel was a welcome one to us.
Even though I wasn't crazy about the directing choice,
which is what I was about to say. Yeah. Neither of us are really into Michael Chavis. I feel like I think I mentioned in our text thread yesterday. It feels like he must the studio. He must be on time, be on budget, and have no problems on set. Because the studio seems to love bringing him back. I mean, he delivers films that make enough money too. I think they make enough money even if they're not flashy or not great movies.
Well, and I think the first Nun did have behind the scenes issues from what we could
Mhm.
tell, because James Wan did come in and do reshoots and
Sure.
some of the second unit stuff. Like the best scares in the movie, from what I understand, are the ones that he put back in. Like he shot the entire graveyard sequence and things like that. So there's also the chance that with Corin Hardy, they didn't find the balance they were looking for. Because if I'm
Right.
remembering correctly, the Nun, outside of the Conjuring 2, which was a creative choice for the reshoots versus the it not going over nearly as well with the
Right.
Nun.
Correctorial.
So I
Correctly.
assume that, to your point, Chavez must play well within that box,
Right.
because clearly he did a Conjuring film, like proper, on top of the fact that he had already done La Llorona, and something tells me he's probably doing Conjuring 4. I was really hoping it would either be Juan coming back, which just doesn't seem like is going to happen, or like maybe the whose name is escaping me, who did Annabelle Comes Home.
Well, that would be an
Because
interesting thing. That would
right,
definitely be having Annabelle come home, director. I'm his name
he's
escaping me as
written
well.
Gary Dauberman. Gary
That's
Dauberman.
it, Gary Dobbin. He did a wonderful job there of Annabelle Comes Home. I wouldn't mind seeing him return to the franchise. I still, maybe I'm the optimist here. A lot of times you're the optimist. Sometimes I get to be the optimist, and I'm still holding out hope that James Wan makes a return. I kind of feel like he's doing Aquaman right now, and I kind of feel like Aquaman's going to go over like a lead balloon. I think. I just don't think it's from everything I've heard. Um, I just
That's
think it's
exactly
wrong.
why I don't anticipate he's coming back, because he went and made a deal with Universal for a first look, and Atomic Monsters kind of set up its home over there now, and he's clearly kind of left the WB bubble.
Okay, well that's fair. I thought maybe he'd want to return home to a certain thing that he knows what he's doing on to kind of reset him before he steps forward into a new direction potentially. That kind of got to get safe. Let's get safe
I
again.
think he's going to do that at Universal.
Okay, that's fair. I still hold hope though. I still hold.
Oh,
I
I
still
know. I hear you. I'm just,
that would be the best thing to happen, honestly. Because quite frankly, just like Insidious, I said I don't want to go into many spoilers because it just came out for Insidious, the Red Book. The film was actually very good. I actually enjoyed it quite a bit comparatively to the rest of the franchise. Obviously, it's a step down from one still, though. It was actually Patrick Wilson's directorial debut, and he does a great job. He's very competent. I would actually compare him to like a Michael Chaves, except for I compare him favorably in terms of he's competent, he knows what he's doing. He doesn't quite have a unique, distinct flair of style. Yep, as a debut film, that might be something he goes into, but he does have that kind of there's that potential there. Like jump scares were great. The sound design was great. How he interacted with the sound design. So he had some wonderful shots to it. The film moved along. It's a little chunky here and there, little pacing issues every once in a while. You kind of might expect that from a directorial debut kind of thing. But overall, it was a solid choice. Still a step down. Juan, and like when Juan steps away from his horror franchise, it's always going to be a step down. You can still have success, but it'd always be nice to have Juan return to the fold and
oh yeah, for sure. I mean, look, it's no real secret that I think James Wan is one of the best working filmmakers right now in Hollywood, and
absolutely.
I've been saying that for a while. I think he follows in very specific footsteps of being a director who can do really remarkable work, no matter the genre, no matter the constraints that he's put into. Um, Even though I still think Aquaman 2 is going to end up being, unfortunately, like a pretty big fumble overall, just because way too many hands in that kitchen,
Yeah,
if you will.
correct.
Um,
I would
but
also wonder. I would wonder, does Juan have it outside of the horror genre? Because I know he did Furious 7, which was outside the horror genre, but Furious 7 was good. I didn't want
I mean, it's my favorite Fast film.
Okay.
So, and same with Aquaman is my favorite DC film.
Is it really?
So
How did I know
yeah,
that? How did I not know that? I
we've
enjoyed
had
the
this
swing he took.
conversation.
We probably did. I just forgot it. Absolutely. Aquaman's not something I talk about a lot, to be honest with you.
Aquaman is 100% my shit. Like, it is a horror infused 90s comic book film with a big budget and like all the kind of like pulpy madness that you expect from things like The Rocketeer and The Shadow and that like early 90s filmmaking. And it's just kind of big and bolsterous and does exactly what it wants to do its own way. Like, I love that movie because it's unabashedly itself.
I would agree to a point. I think it does take a lot of big swings, and it definitely has It has a lot to say for itself. It's definitely it's got the flair and significant style that you would want from that kind of film. I wouldn't, although at the same time, I don't love it like you do. I kind of think it's mostly forgettable, to be honest. I don't remember a whole lot of it now when I'm sitting here talking.
Well, it was a great run while it lasted. The show made it a whole like year before PLD ran his mouth, and we had to cancel it.
I gotta say, Aquaman for me, and then Furious 7, which is not my favorite Furious film. I will say he really handled the ending of Paul Walker very well. That was my favorite part of the episode of the installment, and maybe of the franchise. So he did do that well. I will give him that credit. But I would say he has not shown to me outside of horror that he can really hit a home run. I'm still waiting for that. His horror stuff to me is untouchable at this point. I mean, pretty much it's really between him and Flanagan right now for horror direction.
Fucking 10 a.m., my guy. You chose violence like that this morning. God damn.
Hey, it is what it is, my friend. It is what it is.
Yeah. Anyway, so you're a fool, and that's fine.
I'm correct, and you are incorrect, and that is also fine.
I don't think that's how this works at all, actually.
It is. It is, in fact, how it works.
I disagree with your assessment of the situation.
Wow.
All right. The fact that you're having to quote Johnny Lawrence, who's still kind of a villain, tells me everything I need to know about you.
He's a villain? Come on. Are you watching the same episodes that I'm watching? Come on now. See, this is where your faulty analysis is hitting you again. It hit you in Aquaman. It's hitting you now for Cobra Kai. Johnny Lawrence, the hero of all mankind.
So anyway, we're here to talk about Indiana Jones and the Kingdom of the Crystal Skull.
Let's get back on the same page.
Yeah. So obviously, as you guys know, this episode's late because unfortunately, PLD got COVID when we were originally supposed to record this.
Literally minutes before we sat down to record, so I went to New York the weekend before for the Christian Harloff Big Thing Live. Had a great time there. Got to hang out with like a bunch of awesome people. Mark Ellis, Kay Mulligan, Brett Sheridan. Got to see.
All right, keep dropping some names,
Adam
man.
Collins,
You're gonna hurt your back picking them back up.
I don't need to. Back already hurts. I'm an old man. But it was a lot of fun. Basically, it was a great time we had. But then on Sunday, I kind of felt shitty when I got back home from New York, but I didn't think anything of it besides, trip hangover. And then Monday kind of happened. I felt a little bit more shitty, but I'm like, COVID never crossed my mind until Tuesday. I felt I was coughing and it started to get worse and worse. And right before I sat down, I literally had the StreamYard open. PJ got in there and I was like, I'm going to test real quick before we do this. I want to test that. And I went COVID tested. Sure enough, fucking positive. I was like, you gotta be shitting me. Well, needless to say, that canceled the show, canceled a week or two of the program, and we're still catching up now. You're seeing this on a Saturday, and we usually go on Wednesdays. We're doing this on a Saturday so that we can get Dial of Destiny in on Tuesday on a regular.
I was going to say, and therein is the rub of we were supposed to have Dial of Destiny out already, so we're not even going to talk about Dial of Destiny.
Which is kind of weird. We understand that. We understand it's kind of strange because that's everybody's talking about. Everyone wants to know especially our thoughts on Indiana Jones and Dial of Destiny because that just came out. That's what everybody wants to know. We haven't even talked to each other about it yet, quite honestly. We've kind of stayed very much on the surface level so we can dive deep together when we get into the episode. And this may be weird that on Saturday we're coming out with Kingdom of the Crystal Skull footage or content, but let's face it, we've been talking this up for a long time. We had text conversations with Ken Knapsack, who released a great episode with Joseph Scrimshaw and Forest Center about that Kingdom of
Dude, Indiana Jones and the Perilous podcast has become my all-time favorite new listen that I've been having fun with. And it was so funny because we had been going back and forth for a while on the overall feel of Indiana Jones and Crystal Skulls fitting in. This was all pre-Dial while we were having these conversations.
Right.
And it was so funny because it always felt like me being the one banging the drums so hard in the chat because Ken would bring it up and I would get real heightened because I really love this movie and I have very specific feelings about it. And I'd get I'd be like a hyper monkey, just so excited to talk about it. And so then it was just kind of funny when they were doing their podcast and he's like, yeah, Yeah, I was talking to those two mediocre white guys about the movie, like as some of my research, and I was like, oh man, like look at us leaving a blazing trail, if you will.
Really, really, it is. I mean, but let's face it, we both have been beating this drum forever. Every time
I've
anybody
been
talks
on
about
it
King
since
Crystal Skull,
midnight, opening night.
same with me.
Yeah, I
We
was one of
both have
two
loved this
people in my
film.
group.
It's best. I honestly think, and I mean, maybe I'm shooting this up even more than it needs to be shot up, but I believe this is one of the films that we really bonded over, became as close friends over, because we both kind of found each other and like we circled the wagons kind of thing around us. We're like, no,
Yeah,
this is a good movie, and you guys are missing out, and we're gonna tell
yeah,
you why you're wrong.
yeah. Well, so I don't know if you remember, there was that uh early on in COVID, like within the first 2 months, there was a little while where Smets was doing like video watch alongs with Kaiser.
Yes, yes, I do
And
remember
he
that.
and Frankie was on it, and they all decided to do the Crystal Skull watch along, and I was in the chat and basically became like a fourth person that was involved in it because I was basically in the chat gushing about the film
Same, I
and,
remember
like,
that. We both
putting it
did.
to yeah, exactly, and then you and I would start talking about it, and the funny thing was then later, this kinda stuff kinda became like a thing of legend where we'd end up at the bar after like some of the bigger live events, and it would
Right,
always inevitably come up in some capacity because someone would remember that I had had those conversations in the past.
right, right.
And then they want to start picking my brain, and I still get people who tweet at me from time to time who are like, "Man, I rewatched Crystal Skull and like I really came around on it after like talking to you about it." Because they started to see the things that we had been talking about because
Yeah,
it really matters to me. Like I really want people to see the movie for what it is, not the thing that they want it to be, which is two very different things.
right. Yeah,
And that's
I
the kind
agree.
of conversation you and I have been having for weeks about this.
Yeah. Yeah, I don't understand. I think we'll obviously get into it. One of the things I have a hard time understanding is it's such a. I mean, it's a different era. Obviously, Raiders, Temple of Doom, Last Crusade were in one era. King Crystal Skull is so many years later with an older Indiana Jones. It wasn't ever going to be the exact same thing. It was never going to be a carbon
It
copy
never
because
should have been.
and it never should have been. We are in a different time frame. And Indiana Jones, the first three films, did such a great job of like emulating the serials of that era and everything else, that time frame, everything else. And King of the Crystal Skull does the exact same thing for a different era, and I don't understand why people don't seem to understand that. I mean, this is like, I mean, classic. This is a 50s sci-fi movie, really.
Well, it's a 50s sci-fi film that's also dealing with the current Red Scare and
Yeah,
like the very real heightened tension of what people were feeling in the 50s because it's very timely. Like Lucas has very specific ideas. You can see it throughout where he's dealing with Russia and he's dealing with the Red Scare and like someone like Indy who's clearly a hero being looked at as a potential Russian agent. Like he is saying so much in so many ways because those 50s sci-fi movies, as much as I love those giant ants destroying New York and stuff, like those movies are terrible and wonderful. They're bad B horror movies that are
right,
sci-fi from the 50s, but they are all coming from a place of like people being terrified of atomic bombs and
right.
like what the world was like. And that this movie is 100% a love letter to that. And
100%.
you don't have to love it. Like that's fine,
Yeah,
but I just think that you need to meet it on its own terms, not putting on it's the same thing eventually, and this is just like rubbing up on the conversation without saying it, but it's a lot of the same thing I feel about Dial of Destiny. And I'm
same.
not going to talk about it a lot, obviously, because we're going to save it. But the point is that I think that people come into these movies with the wrong intentions when
Right,
you're 19 years removed,
right,
15 years removed,
right.
like, et cetera, et cetera. So you have to actually change your perception on what you're going into because that then actually makes you look at it the right way. And there's not saying that this movie doesn't have problems, but
Oh,
it
well,
does. I think it has a lot less problems overall than people might give it uh,
right.
credit for.
I agree. I agree. And I want to touch base on two things you said. Hey, Lucas, love him or hate him, and you should all love him. He's gotten a
Yes,
lot,
sir.
way too much flack over the years. Lucas is unabashedly gonna tell the story he wants to tell whether you like it or not. If you look back at the interviews he's had about his Star Wars sequel trilogy that never happened, he came out and said his idea was yada 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 about Darth Maul, and he was going to double down on the midichlorians. He actually literally said,
Yeah,
"You're probably going to hate it, but that's a story I got to tell." And did the same thing with Young Indiana Jones. There's a great article that he wrote. He was talking about in Young Indiana Jones Chronicles. He said at the very end he didn't want to do the adventure series that Indiana Jones was. He wanted this different kind of story, this educational story, touching on the politics, touching on historical figures, et cetera, et cetera. He literally says, "People, if this finds an audience, great. People might hate it, but that's the story I'm telling." And that's what Lucas does. And that I gotta respect that, if nothing else. The second thing I really want to touch base on real quick was I actually literally watched Trumbo about 2 weeks before this, and what a great like combination or a double feature that is in a way, because Trumbo was all about obviously the scriptwriter who was blacklisted for being a part of the Communist Party and everything else. So I got to watch a story all about that, and then you can see this in that perspective, watching the hero, the biggest hero that we know, is being considered as possibly a traitor. That says it all, that Indiana Jones is being considered as possibly a traitor even for a second in this movie as a communist. That's how scary, and that's how this blacklist worked. And what a scary time to be in America.
Well, right. I mean, that's part of why it works so well, right? Like, to me, at least, it really leans in on all of that. And you actually see it even in the thing that, like, when Dean Stanforth basically is like, when hysteria meets academia, maybe it's time to call it a career, because at that point, what are we even doing? Like, you can't really even function, right? So it's 100% very honest in the era and what it is. And again, I think some of the bigger eye rolling moments, if you will, for certain people come in this movie. But like, ultimately, at the end of the day, I don't think most of it is very different than the stuff that this series is set out to do. There's some of it I don't necessarily love either, but I don't find it nearly as out of place as people seem to make it. Like, this movie, I'm going to be honest, man. Like, I remember walking out of that movie in 2008 and feeling so overwhelmed and overjoyed that I had seen a new indie adventure, only to have like my entire group of friends at the time who I was with all like ragging on the movie and ragging on me. And then we were in the early infancy of the internet, and the internet just like piled onto this damn movie. And it was the Star Wars prequels all over again. And I was just tired, and I was like, I don't want to do this. Like, I just want to enjoy the stuff that I enjoy. And I've kind of stayed with that this whole time, because I know that there's people who, Ken, as we were talking about, has said like he never watched it again post it opening in theaters, because for the most part, he just kind of was like, oh, we're not supposed to like it. Okay, then. And he like got on that bandwagon. Yeah.
Bought into it. A lot of people did buy into it. Groupthink is a real thing. Sometimes you have yourself. I mean, I've been victim. I'm not saying I've been victim to it. Sometimes I'll watch something, and everybody will say it's horrible, and I kind of start thinking like, wow, is it me? Is it actually, maybe it really is horrible? I start looking at it more, like start picking out the bad parts. Like, well, that part wasn't very good. That part wasn't very good. And by the end of the conversation with myself, I'm talking to myself, maybe I've convinced myself that, maybe this wasn't as good as I thought it was. And that's a shame, because why would you do that? The enjoyment of movies is something you should strive for. If you like something, why should you search for something that, why are you searching for a reason not to like it? It's like being in a relationship with your wife, like going, well, why shouldn't I be married? And poke at that. No, why should you be married? Or why should you like this film? And celebrate that. And that's what I've always tried to do. And it comes to that, spoiler alert. A spoiler here for me. This is my least favorite of the original four. Absolutely. I will take the other three above it overall. I still love this film, though. I feel that it fits right in the saga. That's the key thing I argue. If you want to tell me that this is your least favorite of the four, I get that. Completely get that.
Yeah, for sure.
Tell me it's not a part that's so far down from the rest of the series. That's where I go, bullshit.
Yeah, 100%. I mean, there's no world where this is that much different than the others. It's just not.
It's different in a purposeful way, and that's what's unfair if you don't meet it on the level that it's trying to showcase you. It's specifically going at it in a different fashion, and if you don't meet it there, that's kind of partially on you.
Yeah. Oh, so I should make a small aside here. You were talking about wives or relationships and things. My girlfriend listens to us do this show.
You did mention that. Hi out there.
Yeah. I got called out for how I said that she interacted with me over me seeing Keaton back in the Flash trailer and getting all excited. And I should just make a note. She wasn't like, you fucking nerd. Like I play that up as myself as for funsies, and I don't want anyone to think no. She loves me very much and wants to make sure that I'm not. She embraces me as I am. And that's the most important thing. And I would just like to clarify that for the people of the internet who were like, wow, you get talked down to like it. No, that's not like that. And I just don't want that to live out there. So,
I'm just glad Kim doesn't listen to us. And so that's okay.
every time you tell me that Kim threatens to listen to us, I get a little nervous inside because I'm always like, it's us. I don't know, man. Either that or it's all just going to wash over and,
She won't care. Eventually, that's what she'll just be like, you guys are fucking idiots, and move on. That's what she'll do. That's okay. Because we are fucking idiots. We're also two mediocre white idiots in the box, as well as being two white idiots.
We needed to get back on the box train.
We do. It's been a while since we've done a Doctor Who episode, and I'm getting excited.
We've been very busy, you guys.
Yeah.
Life has been busy.
Let's get into the actual film now as we're getting into the character. We went over our basic overall. Anything last you want to talk about overall before we get into some of the more specifics of it?
No, I was going to say, I'm just excited to jump in because we really have been talking about this for what feels like forever. The funny thing to me is that this movie opens in 2008. It's been 19 years since the last movie by the time this one opens, because it was 1989 when Last Crusade came out. Indy 4 was a movie that kicked around forever. There were very many variations of the script. It's very famously known that Frank Darabont wrote the Saucer Men from Mars script. That was one of the many, many iterations of this story. Kind of like Last Crusade, to be honest. Last Crusade similarly had very many versions of its script before it became what we ended up with.
Right.
But eventually, Lucas was really set on this alien thing, and he was going to do it. And Spielberg and Ford clearly were not that thrilled about it, but their friend was not going to let it go, and they were all really feeling the need to do something else, because Spielberg had come off of doing 4 very serious dramas and was really looking to find fun again and see if he still had that. And so you could tell that they really went kind of compromised with Lucas on the vision of the film just so that they could get it made. Right. And it's interesting too, because then Spielberg gets David Koepp to come in on write the film. Koepp obviously had worked with Spielberg a bunch of different times on different movies like Jurassic Park and things like that. So Koepp is one of those guys that he is kept around. But enough that he is also credited on Dial of Destiny. He's actually, I think he's the only writer to be credited over 2 films in the franchise.
That sounds right. Yeah. You always think that Lawrence Kasdan was so heavily involved, but he really wasn't.
No, he really wasn't. So George Lucas and Jeff Nathanson, again, also who had worked with Spielberg before this on Catch Me If You Can, they came up with a story for the film, and that is kind of where this is finally fully born. And Indiana Jones and the Kingdom of the Crystal Skull opens. They take it to Cannes, just like the Dial of Destiny one. It actually, the weird trajectory of it all is very similar, same time frames for the most part, same opening, following, same weird talking points around it. And yet at the same time, in hindsight now, it's 2023. This movie came out 15 years ago. And this movie has gotten better with age. I legitimately think that it has gotten better as it's gotten along. And I actually really loved seeing people starting to come around on it over the last several weeks. Before Dial came out, people finally were revisiting it and starting to actually see a lot of the good within the film.
Yeah, agreed. I'm the same way. It seems like if more and more people were coming out of the woodwork saying that, they had gone back, they had taken a second glance at it, and it was for the better. And I feel like we had something to do with that partially. I'm going to take a little bit of credit.
I'm going to 100% say that we led that charge.
At least in our little circle of friends, so to speak.
Yeah.
But what a great depiction of things. Obviously, Lucas, again, this is what I was mentioning before. Lucas is going to stick to his guns. He wants to tell the story he wants to tell with interdimensional beings, of course, not aliens, interdimensional beings,
correct.
as John Hurt says. But this is obviously something that was bound to happen. It is the only shame of it is that I wish we could have gotten it a little bit sooner. We could have gotten a couple more films, I believe, between Last Crusade and this, and it would have been nice to have had to seen the actual progression of Indy from where he was in Last Crusade through to where he is King of the Crystal Skull. But that's life happens that way. Unfortunately, we have three of the biggest people on the planet when it comes to things like Steven Spielberg, one of the biggest directors, Harrison Ford, one of the biggest actors, and Lucas, one of the biggest producers, directors, writers, storytellers of our time. So sometimes getting them together to do something, it makes it's tough, and they had to develop where they're all happy with it. I'm just glad that we got it because that's the other worst case scenario that we would never have gotten it. So that's step number one. But going into the film, I got to say, I remember sitting in the theater and the first sequence opens up and I felt a little like tinge of, what is this? Like the Elvis stuff comes out, the racing coming around, and it took me back for a second and I kind of like sat in it and I was like, oh, this is what we're doing.
Mm-hmm.
And it right there was a perfect setup to the time period. It's Elvis Presley. It's George Lucas's favorite topic, racing cars. As you have these like
it was his tinge of American Graffiti that was put into the Indy series.
Exactly. It's American Graffiti kids racing past these military guys running on the roadways. And I thought, I almost knew right away, like, I think people think they're going to get this or like this as much because it's a totally different time. But that's exactly the point. It's a different time. I think that set it up perfectly.
I've always, people are so hard on the opening because number one, they all love the shift of the mountain to like the Paramount logo mountain to a mountain or something of some sort. And the funny thing for me is like people get real up in arms over the opening of this one with the CGI gopher. And it's never bothered me because again, it feels very kind of fitting to the new era, the new world, this new version of what we're getting used to. And it's just kind of a silly gag to set up that we're actually in a place that is so out in the middle of nowhere. There's no mountains around. They can't do anything about it, right?
Right.
So, like, I've always enjoyed that. And so, to your point, then you get this car race sequence at the beginning of the movie, and we're taken on this like fun adventure with Elvis playing in the background. And it's kind of actually like weirdly charming because it's very disarming. Because then the next scene, you have these guys just gunning down a bunch of American soldiers, and you realize that they're all Russian agents.
And the funny thing is, like, I mean, right before that, the guy like smiling at the kids, like he's like, "I'm going to race with them," kind of thing. It's kind of funny, even though the one guy stays obviously still pretty grim faced. But it was such a dichotomy. All of a sudden, next thing you know, like, oh shit, this is going down now. What's happening now?
Yeah. So it's just very interesting to me, and I really, really think that it sets the tone right. It sets the mood right, but it also gives Spielberg a chance to do something which he's very good at, which is using shadow for a reveal. And there's actually, it's very interesting. I would say that this movie's probably closest to Temple of Doom in a lot of ways for being kind of off the beaten path, doing the thing that it's doing, all the bigger swings that it takes. But it's actually a lot closer to Raiders in like its reveals, in the way that a lot of the story beats are, in a lot of the way that the characters interact. This movie actually wants to be very close to Raiders in a lot of its story ideas.
It does, and it's interesting because to me, obviously, not only specifically Spielberg is definitely at a different place in his life directorially speaking. He obviously did his adventure period in the 80s and the 90s and everything else. He was starting to do more. I mean, he had Minority Report, obviously. He had War of the Worlds just recently, but he was starting to kind of veer more towards that serious drama. The Munichs, then Lincoln's coming up eventually. That's where his bread and butter start lying. So Spielberg is not quite that same adventure director. Um, but I don't think that some people have decried his directing of this for that reason because he seemed to be not the same director. But to me, I'm like, that makes perfect sense to me. You're calling back to the original. You're not being the original. You don't want to repeat the original. You're kind of doing callbacks at a new stage of life. If that makes sense.
Yeah. No, 100%. And you know what's funny? I wanted to touch on this real quick because you brought it up, but I really think that the one thing that Lucasfilm has dropped the ball on a little bit with the character is filling in some of the time frame between Last Crusade and Crystal Skull, and then like actually doing something with that span of time, even like in an animated series, because there's 100% like concepts out there for an animated series. Like there's a great concept trailer for one that is so thrilling and so exciting, and that it would just so easily be able to explore some of the character beats before we get to Crystal Skull. And it might be a little Clone Warsy, but like imagine actually having some of those characters like Mac being in the show, working with Indy and knowing where that's going to end up. You
Right.
know, there is potential in that. And, a lot of the books that came out after what in the mid 90s, a lot of those Bantam books, like they're all set pre Temple of Doom and kind of give you an idea of the bridge between young Indy and Temple of Doom. And some of those actually just started hitting ebook for the first time. Someone was posting that on Twitter the other day. So like you can go in and get some of those books and they're all very good.
I might have to, honestly, because I've never read them. I never, in spite of being a big
Oh yeah,
indie
I
fan,
have
I
all
never
of them.
read the books or anything. So I might. How many of them were there?
There's only 12, I think.
I'm not
Like
sure that.
only 12, but they're easy reads. They're like 300-400 page books. They're basic Indiana Jones adventures. Like they're very good. So
Yeah, I really do
definitely
want to
worth
see
it.
that. I definitely want to read those. I want to play the games. I want to do everything else. But I agree with 100% about the animated series that they could have filled in the gaps. So that's what I mentioned before. How I wanted to see some indie between them because for that exact
Well,
reason.
right. That's why I wanted to touch back on it because you had brought that up, and I was like,
Right.
yeah, I agree with you. That's a thing that I've been thinking for a long time.
I think it's something we could do now, and we could actually have the Clone Wars version and have the Rebels version. We could have the version that takes place between Crystal Skull and Dial of
Yeah.
Destiny to kind of fill in some of those gaps. And we could see some characters return that we never got a chance to see, kind of thing. That would be kind of very, very cool to see what would happen between these people. But that's something for the future. Hopefully, we still will get something like that. There's potential for that, obviously, with Harrison Ford hanging up the fedora now after Dial of Destiny. I think that's pretty much a sure thing. Unless the only way I can see Harrison Ford putting on the fedora again for any way, shape, or form is like for a bookend of like they decide to do a short round series on Disney Plus or something like that. I can see Harrison Ford being in the first episode to kind of like bookend
Pass
it,
the torch, if you will.
kind of thing. I could see that happening in a way, but otherwise, no go. So the way to fill in those gaps is to do the animated series like they've done for Clone Wars, for Bad Batch, and for Rebels.
I 100% agree, and I think that that's the thing that they should do. And honestly, tying it into the movie itself, like imagine one
Right.
about kind of this big warehouse that you're in and seeing more of these different things that Indy might have found along the way that end up over there too, because it's very Warren-esque, if you will, from The Conjuring. But we have to imagine, obviously, there was the alien body or the interdimensional being's body. Then there's the Ark of the Covenant. What else is in there?
Right. A lot of stuff probably Indy's grabbed, to be honest with you, at this point.
Right, exactly.
Did you ever see you ever watch that show, Warehouse 13?
Warehouse 13. I have it. I love that show.
I love that show too. I thought it was so much fun. I have to rewatch that. I haven't thought of that in years. But that's one of the things exactly. We could have Indiana Jones in a Warehouse 13 style animated series in a way. I think that'd be great.
Yeah, I mean, there's plenty of ways to do it, and that I think Crystal Skull actually lends itself to being able to do more stuff like that. Like, if anything, Crystal Skull reminds us that the character can actually do more interesting things, and you can kind of explore different genres with the character. And imagine doing like a haunted house style something, because they've 100% they had flirted with that in the past. That was one of the openings of Last Crusade, like I talked
Absolutely.
about, before it became Crystal
Right.
Skull. Or before it became Last Crusade,
Right.
rather. Like, there was the idea of the Scottish haunted castle to open the movie. I love that. Like, let's play with that.
Yeah.
So, the way that this movie opens, I know that people talk about it a lot, because there's like a weird ADR with Ford's voice kind of at the beginning of the movie. But I've always loved the reveal of Indy
Oh,
back
it's
for the first
classic.
time, dude. It's very perfectly in line with what I anticipate of the character. Getting pulled out of the back of a truck, he's clearly on another adventure already when this all started to happen. He's grabbed, just that reveal, the hat on the ground, the way that the camera pans up and the shadow work on the side of the car as he puts the hat on, like it's
And the
specifically
theme starts
so great.
swelling in. The
Yeah,
theme swells in just a little bit, not the big one, but just like kind of like, there it is. There's that John Williams
and it's
score in the
just the
background.
Russians. He's
Yeah,
so mad about it.
he's so mad about it. And then the introduction of Mac, who I got to be completely honest here. I had heard some people like talk shit about Mac. They didn't like Mac. They didn't feel like an Indiana Jones character or something like that. I have no idea what these people are talking about. I thought Mac was a great addition to the franchise, and I thought Mac felt exactly like he was displayed as a person who has adventured with Indiana Jones before. He's obviously had like. I feel like this is the first time that it's kind of a Han and Lando kind of situation. Like they're kind of like probably brushed up as both allies and as like maybe enemies at some point or other, depending on what was going on. But what a great character, Red Stone. Great addition to the franchise. One of my favorite bits about Crystal Skull. I don't know how you think about it.
No, I love Mac.
Right.
It's so funny to me because people get weird about the character. You're right, and I don't really understand it because he feels 100% true to a lot of what I anticipate a character like that, especially in that era, feeling like. And he's clearly a dude who's kind of lost his path, but he has good intentions. The problem is that he's clearly also lost himself and he's desperate. And so him basically turning on it, playing Indy so badly twice is such a interesting move because it actually makes you kind of feel sad for him. And
Yeah.
for Indy. And I actually like it because it's an interesting dynamic that plays into the bigger message of the movie about, we're in that age of life where life starts taking things away instead of giving them to you.
Yeah, that's
And
a great
that's
take.
even taking away a friendship that he did not like this whole time. He thought Mac was a friend, a trusted companion, and he is not.
No, he can't. And it's actually one of the themes of the movie, like you mentioned. Obviously, we deal with a lot of loss, a lot of gain as well. Obviously, we're going to come up to a scene after, which we'll get to. We can talk about that. We'll come back to the adventure scene. Obviously, later on, we have the sequence where we learn that Marcus Birdie and his father have both passed. He's
Right.
kind of like on his own. He doesn't have anyone. He's got. I mean, Jim Broadbent is his friend as a dean, but it feels like his character has never been like a long term best friend. He's been like a best friend of this juncture, so to speak, because people are passing and he's got not as many people around him. It's about family, what family becomes later on to Indy as the film eventually ends. Obviously, we have some things we learned about Indy in this film as we'll get there. But that's exactly the point. So having Mac betray him it was just a sad touch on this is where Indy is. He's being betrayed by his country, being betrayed by his friends. He's
And he's
advancing in
being
age, and
betrayed
what
by
does he
life.
have? And what does he
Yeah.
have at this point?
Yeah, it's really interesting, and I actually like it quite a bit. And, not for nothing, like, I think that the movie actually is also not nearly as weirdly hard on his age as I think people also think that it is. I remember people thinking that the movie mocks how old he is like the entire time. There's very few
A little
jokes,
bit.
terribly aimed at his age because it's really just more contemplative about what it means to get older. Like
I
the
think,
only person who makes fun of him really is Shia.
yeah. And that's a character who would. It didn't matter if this was Last Crusade, he would have done that kind of thing. It's about the character being older than he was at that
Right.
point. He was the father type character to him, regardless even what the situation is. And actually, I will say that's kind of funny. It's one of those kind of like unironic jokes that happen to be ironic after the fact. Where I think one of the lines is Shia actually goes, "What are you 80?" And now, of course, we have a Dial Destiny come out where he actually literally is 80.
Yeah, right. Which is just so hysterical to well, and, he shot it when he was 78, which is even
Right.
funnier. So then, like, there's a joke in Dial to jump ahead where she's like, "That hat makes you look 2 years younger." And that made me laugh because that also
Yeah.
feels very a play on his age in real
Right.
life.
Yep.
Um, but yeah, I don't know, like, I keep going back to this movie, and the more that I revisit it, like I watched it a few times before we did this, and this opening is so thrilling, like top to bottom. And I mean that all the way through the fridge sequence because this
Oh, we'll get
feels
to the
like
fridge
indie
sequence.
in the 50s, in the middle of the Cold War, in the middle of the Red Scare, in the middle of all of that. But it also still has that Spielbergian flair. And yeah, it's clearly much more sci-fi out the gate, right? All the use of the magnets to find the body and stuff. Like
Right.
it's very different than you might expect, but at the same time, it all feels very in line with what I would consider the series to this point. I think people forget that this is also a series where a dude's heart got ripped out of his chest and,
Yep.
they opened a box that melted people's faces and a 1,000-year-old knight was living in a cave by himself and waiting for someone and like,
Speaking perfect English, by the way.
yeah, speaking perfect English. Like there's so many things that shouldn't work,
Right. But you don't
but they
need to
do.
care because they work. They do
Right.
work for the story. Um, Next up, they
You gotta
do
just embrace it on that level.
exactly 100%. Before we get into the big action sequences I do want to talk about, we also get the introduction, obviously, of the villain of the category um, of the movie, rather. Uh, uh, Kate Blanchett, of course, playing Irina Spalko. There's also been a kind of a talk about her as well. But I got to say, I
She's
don't
fucking
understand
great
that
at
issue either because Kate Blanchett's one of my favorite actresses in the world, bar none. She is phenomenal in everything she does. They kind of make some issue about her accent, and I don't really care. She's a little cartoonish. Is she a little cartoonish? Absolutely. Does it fit the series? Absolutely fits the series and fits the film it's supposed to be in. Again, as part of that 50s sci-fi homage in a way, she is a perfect villain. She knows what she's doing. She's doing everything she does is purposefully uh, aimed at the story that she's in. And so I can't take any real criticism of her to heart because I think she does it wonderfully.
I actually think she might be the second best villain in the franchise.
Yeah,
I think Blanchett 100% knows the movie she's in.
Mhm.
She 100% understands the character and the complexities. I love the way she delivers all of her dialogue. The way she plays off of Ford is awesome, and she
Yeah.
gets so much to do. And maybe that's a part of it, but like I don't feel like all the indie villains always get a ton to do. Like Last Crusade's biggest problem, and I think the movie is pretty much perfect, is the fact that the villain doesn't really there have a lot to do. Like, he's not that interesting. But Crystal
Right.
Skull, I like Spalko. Spalko is super interesting, especially because there's this tinge of I'm not gonna say she wants to overthrow her own leader, but she definitely seems like she could take the power because she's so obsessed with the occult and these ideas of knowing things before people. Like, she's always trying to be 10 steps ahead. And I kind of love that about her.
Yeah, me too. I mean, she definitely, obviously, the villain is never the top guy. Obviously, Hitler wasn't the villain. You see him briefly in Last Crusade. Obviously, I mean, wasn't the villain for the first and three. Obviously, Irina Spalko is not in charge, but she is one of those ones that's close to being in charge. And those always have the ambition of getting higher up. If she got the power she wanted, then she would definitely take over the role eventually. That would be in her mindset. Um, but again, like you said, she knows the movie she's in, and I love it for it. Everybody seems to know their movie they're in, except for sometimes the audience. I think that's part of the problem.
Well, and again, I mean, I think this is the bigger conversation of what the audience is actually expecting out of things instead of meeting a movie on its terms, because there's plenty of movies that I don't necessarily love, but I understand what it's trying to say. And as long as I meet it on that page, I can find some sort of, y- understanding with it. And then I can enjoy it a little more than I might normally. Like,
Yeah, I
it's
agree
the
with that.
Christopher Nolan of it all for me. It's a thing you and I talk about a ton. I really don't connect with a lot of his movies
And
because
I
they
do.
are so cold. Right.
And it's
Exactly. But
funny, but you do. Yeah, we have that conversation, but we can be respectful about it. And I understand where you're coming from because I can't deny that you don't have valid points about it. It just I do connect with it on an emotional level more than you do for whatever reason. I don't know what that reason is. We don't know what that reason is, but
it's who he is as a filmmaker, right?
right?
But I still meet him in the middle, and I would never say that I may not love Dunkirk, but I'm never going to call it a bad movie.
Absolutely. Dunkirk's probably one of my least favorite of his films. I still think it's a phenomenal movie. It's phenomenally well crafted. It's a phenomenal piece of art in many ways.
So, you know, it's just one of those things. And I like seeing people finally meeting this film on its actual merits. You know what I'm saying?
Right. Absolutely. 100%. So let's get into that action sequence, right? I mean, that action sequence, woo, that is a great, great action sequence. One of my favorites of the series, quite frankly. I'm going to put it out there right away. It's just sets the tone of where Indy is now. He's a little bit older. He's not quite as active as he used to be, obviously. But as soon as Mac betrays him, the guns go off. Indiana does this thing. He does a couple. He has a quick little one-liner. I like Ike. Talking about is when he shot at communists at the time and everything else. Gets the gun to go off, and he goes around running around again. Maybe like he's 40 when he's 60. I don't care. It's fine. You're allowed to do that in this kind of movie. He's jumping around left to right, and right away when I first said if that moment where the reveal happens and the hat and everything happens, if that doesn't sink you into this is like an Indiana Jones movie. It's a moment where he throws the whip, swings up, doesn't quite make the jump he's supposed to, ends up landing the Jeep behind him, crashes the windshield, sits there and just goes, damn, I thought it was closer than that.
And then he starts punching Russians. It's fantastic.
That's Indy right there.
And that's this opening is really great. I'm with you. I think this is actually one of my favorite set pieces in the entire franchise because it's just a lot of fun. And hearing the Williams score again, it's seeing Indy in action again. It's just very thrilling. And it's really fun, and it's got this like very cool and different style and sense. And again, I mean, we all know it's very familiar because you're in this warehouse that we've clearly seen before, and you're starting to realize where it is. And of course, then the movie does go out of the way to show us, hey, look, the Ark of the Covenant is still in here. Like, what a nice little nod. And it's not an unnecessary one at all. Like, I think it's actually just a nice little piece. You just put it there, you know, and it feels 100%. Nice.
100%.
But the other thing that's interesting is like we do get a little bit of a car chase in this, and you get a little bit of that sci-fi tinge because I actually love that the fight ends up with him and that big German soldier ending up on that like mining car type of, you know, yeah. But it's like that super fast little military vehicle. And it's very fun and just feels, again, very Indy in the 50s. And if you can get on board with that, I think you can get on board with the rest of the movie, which is why the Doomtown sequence continues to, you know, be so good in my mind. And
I love that sequence. It's like it's again one of those things that's most like overhated, and I don't necessarily understand why. Is it a little wacky? A little bit, but it sets up exactly. It sets up the time frame just like everything else does. This is the nuclear time where they're making all these tests. It's a scary time for the world, and this projects exactly where we are in the world.
And I do love that this sequence had kicked around for so long in a Spielberg film because originally the Doomtown sequence would have been in Back to the Future, and then they decided to change the entirety of Back to the Future because originally Marty was going to have to go to a Doomtown and be in a lead-lined fridge. The fridge was what was time traveling, and that was what was going to get him back, was being in a Doomtown when an atomic bomb goes off. Then, of course, they like massively overhauled that, and that is not what we ended up with in the movie. But the fact of the matter is that it was there, and it kind of just kicked around for almost 30 years until it ended up in another Spielberg movie. And I love that. And I think it's so fitting here. And there's something fun about it, but again, also something super scary and eerie. And dude, don't tell, like that shot of the mushroom cloud going off and Indy standing on the hill, kind of staring at it. That's iconic.
Absolutely. And it's one of the, it just, again, I don't understand why it's that big of an issue. I mean, they had the Mythbusters episode. It actually proves that it could actually work. They actually remember to see that it could actually work. So get off your high horse that never happened, that would be as impossible as a movie thing. It actually legitimately could possibly work. So I don't want to hear anymore. I'm done with that. If Indy can survive jumping out of a plane using
On
a
a
life
raft.
raft on a raft, and then going over water. Like this could work.
Yeah.
Especially
Oh,
for a
100%.
fucking movie. Look at all the superhero movies. Look at the John Wicks of it all, where he has like in the Mission Impossibles. I just watched Rogue Nation. He has that the guy dies, gets brought back to life, gets into a car crash where he flips over back and forth, then gets on a motorcycle and slides out, and he's fine for the rest of the movie to still continue to save the day. If that stuff could happen, Indiana Jones locked himself in a fridge and get exploded. He could survive it. It's fine.
Oh, 100%. And I just think it's so blown out of proportion.
It is. It is.
As an argument and as a thing for people to focus on. Clearly, like, quite possibly just doesn't make sense to me.
They really hone in on that. I'm kind of like, that's what you're honing in on. Is the reason why the whole film sucks in your mind is because of a fridge incident. Like, come on. It's fine. Shut up.
It's so weird, dude. I don't know why people are. No, it's fine. I don't get why people are so weird about it. I really don't. Like, I find it totally within the realm of what these films were to this point. And I think that by pushing it into, I think people love the Judeo-Christian iconography. I think that's a big part of it too. And I think that, like, that's also why Temple of Doom is looked at unfairly, is that people don't necessarily love the voodoo black magic side of that world. They don't seem to like when Indy gets a little bit more heightened in and mythical. But the thing is that to a lot of people, anything that's Judeo-Christian is also just mythical. Like, I don't necessarily subscribe to a lot of the beliefs of the Christian culture and their stories. And so to me, that is also just, what it is. And that's why there's a line in the movie that, like, points at that, which is Shia LaBeouf going, well, that doesn't look like God to me. And it goes, depends on, and Indy says to him, it depends on what God you believe in. Like, people are different, and you don't necessarily, none of us subscribe to a lot of the same things. We all have different beliefs. And so I like that this movie pushes us to be like, actually, Indy's also confronting the idea of there being life outside of life. That is very interesting to me. And again, it's exactly the same thing that Raiders is asking you to do. Like, Raiders is asking you to believe in an all-powerful God who was going to get so angry he's going to kill a bunch of Nazis at the end.
And spoiler alert, that's what happens. So,
exactly. Right. And so
it's science is the fridge.
Yeah, I just think that people get weird about the weirdest things with this franchise.
100%. Before we move on to the next, the Professor Jones moment, I want one more thing I want to bring up about a fun part of that action sequence, and it's a great bit of lines, and it also sets up perfectly the Indy Mac relationship. Indy gets the truck, and Mac's in their truck, and they're going head on. They're playing chicken with each other. And all you see is Mac, you don't know him. You don't know him. You don't know him.
You don't know him, Boris. You don't know him. You don't know him. Yeah.
It's such a funny moment. It's a great setup for the relationship and for the rest of the film.
Yeah, and I like that shot of Indy too, where he just looks angry at that point, because obviously he's gonna be the why, Mac? Yeah, I've had a run of bad luck lately, and I'm a capitalist and I just go where the money goes. And Indy feels so betrayed that he's just gonna be like, you know what? Fuck this guy. And he's gonna ram that truck straight into him, because it gives me that kind of, you want to go talk to God? Let's go see him together. I don't have anything better to do.
Right. It's very
similar to Raiders. Like, it's very similar to that to me, and feels kind of tonally as a tie back to that. But this time it's more the actions instead of the words.
Absolutely. 100% on that. 100% on that. What a great moment. What a great sequence. So,
but
all right, we'll move on to, we get to see the Professor Jones. It's a great moment. We get Professor Jones for a little bit. And this is just like the rest. It's kind of, he's in his where he wants to be. He wants to be the professor. He's been pulled out a lot of times to do his adventure, but he likes doing the professor thing. When Jim Broadbent character comes in and informs him basically that he has been put on suspension because of the potential communist leanings that we've learned about. But you know what? Actually, before we go into that, I did forget one thing that I can't believe. Like, I know you want to mention that, and I want to mention it too. We did have one scene in between this, the Neil Flynn of it all.
Yeah,
Neil
I was going to say, you mean the return of Neil Flynn to the Harrison Ford verse, if you will.
Yes. What a great sequence that is. First of all, of course, when he starts berating him, this sets up what I was talking about before, where George Lucas shows you the hero of heroes, the Captain America, if you will, is being accused of possibly working with the communists. Like, what the hell is this situation?
I adore this scene for a lot of reasons. Again, I think it plays into the hysteria of the era. I think it really creates that air of unease of where does Indy fit in all of this. It's really great, but I love it also on like a completely meta level of I'm a huge Scrubs fan. And there's an episode in Scrubs where JD discovers that the janitor is in The Fugitive.
Right.
And they really play it off as Neil Flynn was a stage name that the janitor had taken on to be an actor in movies. And so there's just kind of this fun idea of the fact that he stops Kimball on the train in The Fugitive, only to bring this around 15 years later, where he's also like now a government agent who's saying that, how can we trust him? Because originally he's trying to stop him because he thinks he killed his wife. Like there's a little bit of a weird meta tie-in to all this that I really, really enjoy. And then I'd be remiss to also bring up, because the gentleman whose name is currently escaping me, unfortunately, who is his superior, who comes in to like tell them that Indy is, he's a hero. What are you doing? Like, you guys all need to relax and like back off of him. That he is also from like Lost and Torchwood, and his name is just escaping me, but it makes me so happy. Alan Dale.
There you go.
Yeah, I love Alan Dale. So it's fun seeing him show up in it. Like, it's a little bit of there's a lot of good character actors in this, actually, in like this one little sequence, because you also get Joel Stouffer in it also, who's been in all sorts of things before that. Like, I mean, he's mostly known for doing television, but he's one of those guys, if you see him, you just know. Like, he was on Agents of S.H.I.E.L.D. for a while, and, he's done all sorts of stuff, but he's one of those guys with one of those faces where when he shows up in something, you know.
Absolutely. 100%. Alan gets up here as the audience, pretty much as the person he like. That's us saying, do you know how many medals this guy's won? I have vouched for Indy. Indy's a hero. You stupid bastards.
But I really love this sequence, and I think, again, it plays into that next scene when we're back with Professor Jones at the college, and he's basically let go because the government showed up and raided his office, and they say, you're going to take a paid leave of absence.
Yeah.
And he's basically being fired for being a communist, even though he's not a communist.
But what I love about the sequence is that it does show the optimism and how people, you still, even when things are worse, you got to know that there's still people on your side. Because after Mac's betrayal and after the government betrayal, he even like lashes out at Jim Broadbent, because he's like, take the leave of absence. You have no idea what I've done to even like save that. He's like, oh, great. You're sitting at your desk. What did you do, Charlie? And he's like, I resigned.
Yeah.
And he's like,
how did you, my friend?
Oh shit. Yeah. I never should doubt you. Like, no, you could have, but they had it's a great sequence between them. I'm glad that it's a small role to be filled by such a great actor as Jim Broadbent. And I think that says something about the franchise. And people are willing, it's a kind of a Star Wars thing. People are willing to take small roles to get invested in this universe, because it's that fun, it's that impressive, that's an amazing of a standard of a universe. So having Jim Broadbent be available to take a small role, just like the sequence before, it adds so much to the franchise by filling in those smaller pieces with such talent that we have. And Jim Broadbent and Harrison Ford work well together in that scene, as Harrison goes over the deaths, obviously, of his father and of Henry, and of Marcus, rather. It feels like it's like kind of that pause before the storm, but it's a necessary pause.
Yeah. Oh, it totally is. And again, I think because we end up meeting Mutt right after this as well. And you start to really feel this world starting to feel lived in again in a way that I think again people are weird. I see people talking about how much they love Antonio Banderas in Dial of Destiny, but then they get real upset about Jim Broadbent's character in Crystal Skull, and they're pretty much the same to me.
Yeah, the same type of
And
situation. Absolutely.
yeah, kind of same situation, same feel, same vibe. So it's weird to me that people get so odd about it because I actually really like Jim Broadbent's character quite a bit. And
Yeah.
I even love that line when Indy's like, how did your wife react to all this when you told her that you resigned? And how does any wife react with a sense of both pride and panic?
Yeah,
Like,
exactly.
it's just perfect. It's just really well done. And I do like that we get to see a little bit of Professor Jones. It's always good to see a little bit of that version of the character because we don't always get to see him, obviously. Like Temple of Doom, he's never Professor Jones. Like he is, but he's not. Because
We don't get to see him there, yeah, because he's
yeah,
awake the entire time.
there's a tinge of him during the sequence when they're at the dinner and
Yeah,
talking because that's very Professor Jones like, but
yeah.
it's still
He's dressed as
indie,
Professor Jones.
right? But it's
It's like his
still
superhero costume. It really is like his Bruce Wayne is him in his suit, his glasses, and then when he turns into the superhero of India, that's when the hat, the fedora, and the
in the
jacket
whip.
and the whip
Yeah,
come out. That's like,
yeah,
it really is
100%.
funny how that works. It's really, it kind of is like kind of like a play on that to a degree.
Oh, it totally is. I mean, it's no shock that, these were very heavily based on those 30s serials and what was more famous than some of those Zorro and Batman serials back in the 30s and 40s, like
Absolutely,
even Flash
absolutely.
Gordon. So I always loved this, and that's why when we meet Mutt in the next one, like Indy's leaving and Mutt stopping him and being like, "Hey, do you know Harold Oxley?" Oxley, another character I really quite like in this movie,
Yeah,
and this idea that the Russians got him and they're going to kill him because they're all looking for the skull because Oxley was obsessed with it when they were in college and now he's potentially found it is very, very fun and very interesting. And I love the introduction in a Marlon Brando, style suit with the or clothing and the motorcycle, like again, very 50s,
coming
very
out of the
American
fog.
graffiti's. Yeah, it's very American graffiti meets, Rebel Without a Cause meets the Wild One. Like it's very specific, and I like it.
I agree. I agree. A lot of people get very hard on the Shia LaBeouf at all, and I honestly want to say that I think, and I could be wrong, maybe because I don't understand exactly why. I feel like his off-screen activities kind of influence people's viewing of him on screen.
I agree.
Because on screen, I don't think I think he fits the role very, very well. He's supposed to be a young, rebellious, kind of bratty kid who just like he's that kind of guy. He's cocky. He wants what he wants when he wants it. But at the end of the day, he's inventive. He's fun. He makes for a good sidekick.
And he should be brash because
Yes,
Indy was also brash. Right? Like,
absolutely.
we saw that in the beginning of Last Crusade. You see it in a lot of the TV show. Indy was also young and brash.
Short Round was brash in Temple of Doom. A little bit younger, but he was still brash. A similar type of characteristics.
Yeah, again, I think it's that weird disconnect of, almost 20 years later and people putting on what they want versus what it is. And I actually really like the character of Mutt. I think that Shia is very good in this movie. I think he channels a lot of the best of what Karen Allen and Ford bring to their respective roles because he does feel like the son of those characters, even if
Yeah,
he's been lied to that entire time, not knowing that Indy was really his father. Like,
yeah,
that is so interesting to me. And man, I gotta say, in any other world, this move wouldn't work. Creed also pulled it off. The idea of a bastard child that you know the a character in our lives did not necessarily know about, and yet it works because it's also very fitting to the history of Indian Marion
yeah.
and her
Absolutely.
lying to him about it and like hiding the fact that they had this kid after he had abandoned her, after all the things that happened with them. Of course, that's what she was going to do. And I kind of actually like that.
Agreed. Agreed. Fully agree. Because she's not the kind of person who's going to get back in touch with Indiana Jones or Henry Jones
No.
Jr. just because of the kid. Because she's a very strong, independent woman. She's like, I'll just do this myself. I don't need him in my life. He's abandoned me. I'm done with it. And it makes sense that way. And you're right. It works very well because it ends up setting up a great couple of great moments in there, and it's necessary to what the theme of the film is. The theme of the film is finding your place in your family. That's a big part of it. The whole world is turning against you. You always will have your family to fall back on, even if you don't have it at that moment. You can find your family and find your home, and find your basis.
Oh, 100%. And that's, again, it's part of why I enjoy it so much, man. Like, it just works. It makes so much sense to me. And this movie gets so much shit, but like, the Mutt character is super fun. Now, do I love him swinging through the trees? Not necessarily.
I was going to
Do I
wait until that moment. Yes, that is a scene I cannot defend. I'm not going to lie. I will not try to defend that scene.
I'll say this. I can defend it to a point. I can defend it in the sense that the Tarzan serials were real popular in the 50s, and I understand why Lucas was doing it. Like the Tarzan movies were very popular in the middle of the 50s, and they made a bunch of them. Like, if you go and look, there's tons of that. I understand what it's going for, but
it doesn't work.
It's not the best. I think its biggest problem is that it also feels very artificial, and I think that's actually the biggest problem with the movie. And I think that people don't know how to articulate this, and it's something that I've noticed over time. I think that the movie's biggest problem is the fact that it is not shot anywhere but like Hawaii for the most part. And so it's missing that globe-trotting aspect that we're used to. Like, they do globe-trot, but it doesn't feel like we're in so many exotic locales in the same way, because, Spielberg's even said, he was like, I wanted to shoot it basically in one place because I wanted to be able to leave set at the end of the night and I wanted to go have dinner with my family, which, you know what, fine and fair enough if that's how you feel, but it does change the feel. Like, there is an artificialness to the movie that I think is a little overwhelming at times. But at the same time, sorry, not to cut you off. I was just going to say, but at the same time, you know why it kind of works is that it also gives it that like 50s flair of them shooting inside sound stages and on like backdrops. And so there is a give and take to it where I do think some of it is almost intentional, because they were shooting in one place and they knew that, and they built a lot of the sets, but like the rest of it is artificial around it. And so there is this almost like uncanny valley to it, but I think that's almost necessary because of the era it's set.
You know what? I never thought of it that way, because I actually did, bro. I did feel the artificialness of it, and I did have that same kind of thought where I felt like it did not quite travel the globe as much as it did for various reasons. I never thought about the soundstage aspect in the 50s thing, so that actually puts a good spin on it for me, and I kind of makes a lot more sense to me. It was never anything to me that really ruined anything. It was just kind of one of those like, oh, it could have been cool if it did this. It's one reasons why it's like, it's like I said, my least favorite of the four. It just is like, that's one of the reasons why, because it doesn't feel quite up to that globetrotting level. But does make sense why it had to do it. That's not a film breaker for me at all, by far.
Oh no, not even a little bit. But it's just a thing that I was thinking about with the movie and the way that it feels, because I watched it a handful of times before we did this, and it was just like, yeah, man, I get why people feel that way, but at the same time, like, I think most of it looks real good, like, in the way that it needs to. And I kind of vibe with the entire sci-fi feel of it, and that like 50s monster movie feel of it. And so I've always kind of given it a pass for that reason, I guess. But I do think that it's also more intentional than not. But again, to the point, like, I don't necessarily need Mutt swinging through the trees with monkeys. However, I don't mind the sword fight between him and Spalko in the cars.
I will agree with that. I don't. That's something that got a lot of flack, and that's it's wrapped up in the whole vine sequence. The sword fight makes a lot of sense to me, and it feels very Indiana Jones-ish to me. It's the fight sequence that goes on, and sure, is there like a few too many like nut shot jokes kind of thing in there in that sequence? Probably. It's not the greatest, but I think overall it's still a very fun fight. It's a very good fight. The sequence actually is pretty tense, and you see these characters back and forth. I appreciate it for what it is. Absolutely. Sure, it layers a little bit too on the comedy at times, but it's not like, again, it gets overhated for that for some reason.
Oh, it totally does, man. I think about that a lot, and it's funny because again, similar to Indy, I like that Mutt has his own choice of weapon. His just happens to be a fencing sword, because he grew up around fencing, which he talks about a bunch. In the same way that Indy ends up with that whip, and he learns to use it, and it becomes a part of him. I dig that. I think it's smart storytelling. I think that it's fitting with the character. I think that it makes sense that his father is that way, so why wouldn't he be that way? There's a lot of very interesting little pieces that kind of come together that I think people just overlook.
I think so too, and I think part of the problem is, I think, and this is kind of the beginning of this in a way. I think a lot of people look at this and they have this fear that studios are looking to replace their heroes bit by bit. And the idea was they were resistant to Mutt right away because they didn't want to see, because there's kind of like rumors floating around that maybe Mutt would take over for the franchise. Oh, it's Indiana Jones' son, so they're setting him up to have his own, to continue the franchise as Indiana Jones Jr., so to speak.
Yeah.
I mean, I'll be honest, we'll talk about this more with Dial Destiny. There's obviously the same fears that were flown around there about Helena trying to take over the series potentially. But I think that the studio is smarter than that, and I feel like they're better than that. And actually, at the end of this film, that does it perfectly to kind of assuage fears. But at the same time, I think they're resistant to having Mutt do anything that's very Indiana Jones like, because you're like, no, he's not Indy. He's not Indy. He's not my Indy. Hashtag not my Indy. I think
Yeah.
that works against him. It's kind of unfair to the character, unfair to him.
No, it totally is, and that's why I think meeting the character on that middle ground makes sense, right? Like, you have to be able to get past the fact that he's not supposed to be replacing Indy, so stop putting that on him. Like, that's
Right.
not the point of the character, and the movie goes out of its way to say that. That does not also mean that he can't be like his father.
Right. That's what you said. You're saying he's taking over. That's what your thoughts are. People come to
Right.
these films with these preconceived notions, and it ruins their viewing, and they blame the movie for it. No, my friend, the movie's not telling you that. The movie is saying that Indiana Jones had a son, which you don't know about at this point. We don't know. I think we don't know his son yet, or if it happened. Oh, but by the time the Vine sequence does it, we do know that's true.
We're doing that thing where we start talking about everything, and jumping back and forward. The point is,
the point is that he's just being he's being the character he's supposed to be. Sure, he's got some traits from his father. Sure, he's on the side of good. All of the good guys have adventures. Marion has moments. Mac has moments. They all have moments. Short Round has moments. And like when the hell they all have moments. Doesn't mean they're taking over the character, because you know what? Indiana Jones still has plenty of moments to come.
yeah, it's just very silly to me, and I've never really understood the hate for the Mutt character overall,
Yeah.
because I think Shia is quite good, and this was right in that heyday where Spielberg was real high on using him and stuff. So he was in Disturbia and Transformers and Eagle Eye and this. Like, they really, like, Amblin
He's
went all in
talented.
on Shia. He's super talented.
He's super talented. His off-screen activities aside and everything else, see what happens. That happens in life. Unfortunately, some people have issues that they have to deal with, and I wish the best for him. But it doesn't take away from he was super talented to begin with. That's why they were putting all the money in that basket, so to speak.
Oh, 100%, man. And it's just a good character. So I was really glad that I'm glad to see a lot of people starting to reevaluate his character too, as we've gotten farther away from the movie. Because I do think that people are starting to accept the movie as it is, not what they wanted it to be when it originally came out. Unfortunately, it just took them 15 years to finally start doing that.
Yep.
But seeing people coming around on this has been really nice because, you know, there's a lot of stuff in this movie, like, a lot of the little sequences with him and Ford when they're traveling together before they find Marion and Oxley are really kind of charming and really fun. I really like that scene when they're in the grave and they find, um, the skull for the
Yeah.
first, and there's that whole bit about the scorpion and that stung him, and he goes, "Big, it was huge." Good. Yeah, a small one, don't a small one stings you, don't keep that to yourself, like, that one will
Right.
kill you. It I always love that stuff. There's just a lot of really great character moments and character play. He goes, "Well, what do you want to do with your life?" "Well, I want to work on motorcycles." You want to do that for a living?" "Yeah, why not?"
Problem with that?
"Hey,
Yeah,
you
problem
got a
with that?
problem with that?" "No, I mean, do what you love, do what makes you happy." Like,
Don't let anybody tell you differently.
yeah, don't let anyone tell you differently,
Great setup.
because at the time he doesn't know it's his son,
Right.
and I love that. I think that there's
There's a
so
lot of great
much.
moments like that.
Yeah, and
Absolutely.
there's a
The
lot of
sequence
great
where
bonding.
I want to mention specifically the bonding part. Just remember, like you brought up one point to me. He has this conversation. He actually talks about a moment from Young Indiana Jones. He talks about his
Yeah.
sequence when he rides with Pancho Villa, acknowledging the series and making it a big connective tissue. But it's a great piece of history for him. It fits into the story they're telling now. It shows Mutt what he was doing, like when he was Mutt's age, a little younger than Mutt potentially. But it's this great bonding sequence between the two, and it works.
Oh, it's so good, man, and I just look at it so fascinatingly because it just makes sense to me in my head, and I guess that's why I never understood why people got so up in arms about it. And I gotta say, man, the sequence at the college, that whole entire motorcycle chase with them is fantastic because it also gives Ford a chance to be a little bit on the curmudgeonly Sean Connery side. And
Yeah,
there's a lot of little looks and stuff that he gives Mutt during the sequence that are 100% Henry Senior's looks during Last Crusade.
yeah.
So there is a little playful nature to the fact that Indy has gotten older and he is not as thrilled, especially when it comes to knocking Marcus's head off of the statue.
So
But
that happens and knocks out. The look that he does, the Henry Jones Sr. look that he gives
yeah.
to Mutt is classic and perfect. I really felt like I was transported back to Last Crusade.
Oh, it 100% is. Like, it's such a good moment, and I kinda love it because it's like, "Hey, look at that. Marcus gets one last, win."
One gets knocking on the bad guys there. The funny thing is too is Mutt looks to Indiana at that point with like for approval. It's like a
Yeah.
ha ha ha, ha, and he's just like
Yeah.
it's just
So
a great sequence.
it's so good,
Um,
and I love
there's
the
actually a sequence I got to ask you about during that whole chase sequence again. What I didn't know how to take, and part of me hated it honestly, and part of me was like, well, it kind of does fit it,
is
and
it the
that's when
Wilhelm scream?
no, the motorcycle, the Wilhelm screen. Yeah, that's true. But it was actually the end when he slides underneath. The motorcycle slides underneath the tables, and everything. Also, he paused for a second, and the kid sits there and goes, "Professor Jones," and he's like, "You gotta talk," and he starts keeping
You
teaching
gotta
lessons
get out
in
of
the
the
middle of it.
library.
And part of me's kind of like, kid, the motorcycle, you just had a motorcycle crash into you, and throughout the entire, all the tables got knocked out. You're like, not, are you okay? Has everything gone? By the way, talking about this archaeological professor thing. Like, it's just like,
You know why it never bothers me? Because I have to assume that his students know who he is. And so they see this kind of thing happening,
potentially, I
and
guess.
you know what I mean? Because, like, we know that people know who Indy is. Because in every one of the movies, there's some sort of some sort of, "Oh, Professor Jones, I've heard of you. I've heard of your actions. I've heard of your adventures." And so these people all know who he is.
I guess that could be. What's
So I
interesting
think
to me is the fact that the line actually directly contradicts one of his own lines. He said, you want to be good in archaeology, you got to get out of the library. Whereas in like the beginnings, I think it was the Raiders, like he says, you got to be in the library. It's all about the reading and stuff like that. And like
yeah.
that's his life experiences and now just changed him to change his mind on that.
Well, especially because now he's feeling so much older and he's been feeling a little bit obsolete, as you can
Yeah,
tell with everything. And so this idea that actually, you know what? The best version of this is when I'm not in the, not in the library and I'm actually out living. And I kind of like that he embraces that side of
yeah.
it, like more than you anticipate.
I know some archaeological friends of mine really didn't like that line because they say it is really all about the library and stuff. But
Hey
that's
guys,
not even going there.
it's fiction. They're fictional characters. It's cool. Fictional characters. Um, yeah, I really love that entire sequence. And, you know, the truth of the matter is I think that there's a little bit of a lull kind of in the middle of the movie, and it's really because I don't think Spielberg's heart is quite in this movie.
I agree. I think his
Yeah.
grandchildren. There's actually an interview where he said his grandchildren or his children rather, had been like pushing for him to make another Indiana Jones film.
Yeah.
And he kind of like went back, but all right, I'll do it, kind of thing. I don't think he had the same complete drive that he had previously on it. I mean,
No.
I think he was happy to do it, and yeah, sure, we'll have a good time, but it wasn't quite the same all in.
No, definitely not. And it's not like I think it's still exceptionally directed because even like Spielberg with half a heart is better
Oh,
than most filmmakers, period. So the movie suffers a little in the middle as it's trying to get to the stuff with Marion, but once you get to the stuff with Marion, the movie starts to really ramp up again, and it's really good from there on. Even though I like a lot of the stuff with Mutt and Indy during the like getting there.
I actually
It,
want to showcase real quick before we move on to that. Is actually one of the things I didn't like was the Greaser diner sequence because
oh,
again, it was
so
one of
good.
those like man of the time, Spielberg loving it and Lucas doing American Graffiti kind of thing where man of the time hit this guy.
Yeah,
Boom.
you see Joe College hit him.
And without even think, okay, sure, he hits him, and they
Yeah.
he falls into the greasers and the jocks. Get that greaser! And it's like
So perfect.
classic 50s and everything else.
Yeah.
Perfect. That so,
And then it goes straight into the Williams music. It's so perfect.
It's so perfect in there.
I really like Mutt's music in this, by the way. The Adventures of Mutt music is like a really great track.
John Williams is just he's John fucking Williams at this point, the maestro. He can't really go steer wrong. His score is great from Raiders all the way through Dial of Destiny and everything in between. He understands the excitement every single time out and delivers every single time out.
Yeah, 100%, man. It's just so good. And it's so fun. It just makes me happy.
You know what? I do have a sore spot. Kind of, it's not a sore spot, but like we're going back to the graveyard sequence there. By the way, shout out to Ernie Reyes Jr. playing a nice small role as a graveyard. The graveyard guard, whatever they were. Why did they choose? Like we saw the trailer, and they used one take for this line, and then they used a different take for the movie line. And that's the trailer take was actually better. So that actually disappointed me as the movie theater. And the line, of course, is which I looks up and goes, "You're a teacher? Part-time." The trailer take is actually different and a better take. And I don't know why.
Oh, it's way better. And I'll never understand quite why.
I mean, it's a small nitpick, so I'm not going to end it. But at the same time, I remember being in the movie theater going, like, because sometimes when you watch the trailers, you kind of look forward to seeing those scenes. Even though you already seen them, you kind of want to see them like in context.
Yeah.
And so I saw that coming. I'm like, here it is. And I'm like, wait, what? Why did they change
that was it was one of the first times I really noticed alternate takes in trailers versus like the final cut. Because I remember also being in the theater, finding that very jarring and going, I'm sorry, what? Like,
right.
That's odd.
Like we know they take alternate takes, but we didn't have any idea that they're changing them from the trailer to the actual movie.
It happens. It happens.
It does. Not a big deal. Oh, go ahead. All right, we'll continue from there.
I actually do love that graveyard sequence, though. That is the highlight of the middle part of the movie for me. It's kind of fun. Again, it feels a little like Raiders. It's a little spooky. That's kind of that everyone wants to talk about the grave robbing angle, and they even make a joke about that at Indy's expense in this. But like, once again, I think people misunderstand Indy as a character. He's not a grave robber. He's not. Every one of the movies goes out of its way to prove the point that he's not. But I've really always enjoyed that sequence because it's kind of fun, and that like Indy popping up and like using the dart gun to blow it back at the guy is such a great comedic Indy moment.
Oh, it's perfectly Indy moment. It's a perfectly done moment.
Perfectly done Indy moment, and I like it a lot. But that leads to like the entire them ending up in the jungle with the Russians and the return of Marion. Right. Because I really want to jump into this.
Let's do it.
Because this is another one of those like weird hot topics around this movie that I'm still not quite sure I fully understand. There is a part of me that does understand that people think Karen Allen's playing the role a little differently towards the end of the film. But I don't know if I agree with that. I actually think Marion is quite fitting throughout the entire movie and feels just like her again.
Sure, she's different to a degree, but it's also whatever 30 years later. It's a character that's changed a little bit. She's lived a different life. When we met her in Raiders of the Lost Ark, she was at one stage of life. She's at a very different stage of life now. She's past the Indiana adventure. She had a son who she basically raised. Almost seems like she raised by herself to a degree, at least. Even though she married the one guy. I don't know if he died or if he stuck around or what happened with him exactly necessarily as far as how long he was around for Mutt. And obviously was there too. But she lived a completely different life, so she's not going to be exactly the same as she was 30 years ago. None of us are. I'm not the same guy I was 30 years ago. I mean, of course she's going to change a little bit, but she doesn't change so much that like she's a different character. She's just the evolution of that character. I think they actually fit quite nicely with each other still. In
No,
fact,
they do.
the introduction to her again is one of my favorite scenes in the movie because when she comes into play, all of a sudden Harrison Ford plays it so perfectly. You get to see Indiana Jones be like a giddy little schoolboy, like House of Duty called him in Last Crusade rather. She's like, "Oh, Mary," he gets like this, like he like shrugs and gets like all sorts of like,
Yeah.
seeing him again. And it's a great human moment. Here's a guy who's been betrayed by everybody. He's seeing somebody who he knows at the heart of it. And one of the problems they've had, he can trust her. And he's always loved her. So it's great to see each other again. And that's no matter what the second circumstances are.
And it's interesting. Apparently, Lawrence Kasdan came in and punched up the dialogue for all the scenes involving this, like the two of them together, and you can tell because it honestly, these might be some of my favorite scenes in the movie because Alan and Ford are just so good together, and the fact that they haven't missed this type of beat in almost 30 years. Because again, Marion's not in any one of these movies since '81 until 2008. So the fact that it's been almost 30 years to that point and they really have not missed a beat together is really fucking spectacular.
This is
And
Karen
you
Allen's a
feel it.
joy.
Yeah,
She
man.
really is a joy, and she's a she's just a good actress, good performer. But she's got that chemistry. She's got that camaraderie with Harrison Ford, and she's got that spark. You just want to see them together and play off each other.
Yeah, and I just love well, why the hell didn't you make him stay in school? Like once they start arguing and they're stuck in the quicksand together, because that is so exactly the kind of thing that I believe that Indy would do.
This is a great Indiana Jones moment. It's like him and this Sean Connery fighting in Last Crusade. It's that kind of sequence all over again, back and forth. Why did you make him stay in school? And of course, much like, well, what happened to Do What You Love? That's before I was your father.
Yeah. It's so good and it's so fitting, and I just love Karen Allen in this role, and so to see her back as Marion is just such a joy in general. And any time you get the chance to see her is just we should embrace it because she really doesn't act that much.
No,
Like
no.
she's very selective on what she does. And so when she pops up into things, it's always just kind of a treat. And I remember like we all knew she was coming back for it. We'd all kind of heard the rumors, but then they did it and it was just yes. Like, do you actually remember all the lead up to this movie coming out? Because I definitely do.
I
Like,
definitely did because I was ready for this for a while.
yeah, I remember like the mid 90s when everything really started to heat up and we started hearing about the Darabont script and things like that. And I was real young when that started. But like I followed the once production started going. Remember I had that original Comic Con teaser poster that they put out, which was the whip and the hat on the side of the crate. And that's when we all started to lose our minds and we were like, oh my God. Oh my God, they're going to go to the warehouse. We're going to see the warehouse.
Right,
Like,
yeah.
and we all started to go, oh my God, are they going to bring back like are we seeing the Ark of the Covenant again? Like, and that was where it started. We all got
and we did,
and we did. But there was a lot of ideas of, oh my God, is it like the MacGuffin again? And that was very interesting.
Yeah,
it
was a great time.
Yeah, that was some of the more fun because they really did try to mystery box it. Still, it was an early Spielberg mystery box, but it was a fun mystery box. Like I didn't feel frustrated by it while it was happening.
Agreed.
Yeah. So I really love seeing Karen Allen back in this. I love the vibe. I love all of that. And this sequence in the jungle also leads to this scene that I think rivals Temple of Doom in like a weird darkness that I really like. And it's when Indy is bonded with the skull for the first time.
Yeah,
when they're trying to see the power and the way it works. It reminds me very much of having to drink the blood of Kali. I love this.
absolutely. I do too. It's a dark side of indie. I mean, we talked about this in a note. Spielberg and Lucas both said that Temple of Doom was the darker side and a very kind of a angry, meanish film. But doesn't mean that was all bad. We actually love Temple of Doom for various reasons. And so to touch base on that without letting it kind of overtake the movie was a great choice because Indiana Jones always has a little bit of darkness in there, and you have to kind of tap into that just a little bit. And this is a perfect way to do it. And they do it with humor too. They have the moments. I mean, you have the whole thing with Mac, which I love. I'm going to break your nose when I get out of here. And I go. But then he has this moment with the skull, which is kind of scary and kind of dark until it's taken out. Of course, they break the spell and they let him out. Sure, what does he do? He breaks Mac's nose. I told you I was going to do it.
Hi, Mac. Yeah, I actually really love that too, because again, it feels very much in line with Indy being Indy and doing these things where he has felt betrayed by this guy and he tells him exactly what he's going to do. He's going to break his nose. He's going to fucking break his nose, and he does it. He doesn't have time for these people. Like, he's learned that time as it is running short. He's losing things as it is. So this dude who betrayed him, of course he's going to do that. And it really works for me. Now, there's a lot of talk about John Hurt in the movie as Oxley, but I really like the Oxley character. And Hurt, once again, 100% understands the movie he's in because, yeah, it's a super campy performance when he's possessed by the skull and like under its influence, but it's good because it works within the confines of the movie.
Absolutely agreed, 100%. John Hurt is a phenomenal actor. Of course, he knows what he's doing. Of course, he knows the role he's in. You might not like the role. That's fine. I can't argue that, but it fits the movie to a T. And when we do see him break that spell towards the end, we get the true Oxley. We get to see the true John Hurt performance and like going from the crazy level to the more human level, and it makes the performance even better as far as I'm concerned. It fits very well. I don't know what people wanted out of that.
No, and I love what you just said because that moment, they're going to the space between spaces, and Indy realizes he's back, and he goes, "Welcome back, Ox." And he's just but when he's honestly, dude, it's kind of heartbreaking when he's kind of begging to him, and he's like, "I'm your friend, you know, Henry Jones Jr." And he's trying so hard to like win him over, and he's like, "You know, we went to school together,
Right?
you know me, Ox." Like I love that because again, it's also playing into Indy's really afraid he's about to lose someone else.
Right.
And he's not ready to do that.
No.
And
No.
so
If he can help it. Yeah.
no, right. And it works. And it's a really great scene. And again, I think that so much of what happens in this film is thematically so prevalent to like the movie. And I think people overlook it because they think it's going too far camp or they don't quite understand what it's trying to say. But the movie has been telling you the entire time exactly what it is and exactly what it's trying to say. You don't have to necessarily like it at that point, but you have to meet it on that level.
Again, 100% agreed. 100% agreed.
And I know I feel like I've been making that point about every 10 minutes, but it's because every time we get to the next thing, I feel it needs to be reiterated because, you know, we're about to get into this long sequence in the middle of the forest where we kind of were already talking about it with the swinging monkeys, but there's a lot of people who do not like this jungle chase.
At
The
all.
jungle chase is like usually one of the biggest sticking points for people.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And I get that there are parts of it that are not the best. They made some poor choices as far as I'm concerned. But again, it's overhated. It's very overhated. Before we get to that jungle chase, I want to talk about the quicksand moment, of course.
Of course.
Get in there, get Harrison, Indiana. Mutt, of course, is the one who. This is where maybe, oh God, Mutt's doing something in the movie that Indy should be doing, but Mutt breaks the tent and everything else, and they start moving, doing something like Indiana with Jones had done, like, what's going on? I don't know, we gotta get out of here, kind of thing. Let's go, and they run off. They get caught in this quicksand moment, of course. And Harrison, of course, sends Mutt. Mutt goes to get help, and Indy sends Ox to get help the best way possible. That's what leads into this great line, is where we actually get the moment where she reveals that Mutt is actually Indy's son.
Yeah.
Which, of course, that's the great. And we mentioned the line before, but it's worth mentioning again. That's what she says. Like she finally said, she's like, "He's your son, Henry Jones the third." And Harrison Ford sits there, and goes, "Wait," looks, pauses, looks at it, and that's the first thing he says.
Why the
hell
hell
did you make him finish school?
Ford is so good too, man. It just works so well. I love the lead up to it too, because she's trying so hard to tell him, and she's like, "Indy, so about Mutt, he's a good kid, Marion. You should lay off of him about school." Like it's so that way that he starts with lay off of him about school to how the hell did you not let him finish school is just the best. It is a great comedic moment. It is a great in character moment, because again, he's going between like being Indy, but also realizing he's kind of his father. And I kind of love the swing, because now he's realizing, oh God, there's this kid that I should have been taking care of this whole time. And now I'm as estranged from him as my father was from me. And look at what my father did. My father, like, I snuck away from him. And I went and joined a war and like did all these things. And my father, like, I kind of just abandoned my father. And it all plays into his history. I love it. I love it because it understands it.
100%. And that's why, again, I don't understand what people don't like about it. And that's it just throws me for a loop. There's so much good in here. Now, I will say the one thing I do have a minor trouble with is the snake sequence after that, using the snake as a rope, which always seems to be to me, I'm kind of like, how does it even think about that? Now going for a branch, so they're in the wood full of a jungle, and he finds a snake and goes, "I can use the snake to get Indiana Jones out." It's a little forced for me that they had to have the snake joke in there with Indy. So I'm not a huge fan of that moment.
It's silly,
but
I don't hate it. I don't love it, but I
Right.
also just think it's totally fine and kind of fun.
It's a little forced, but like whatever.
But it's also a callback to Temple of Doom for me.
Yeah,
and that's also why I like it, because it reminds me of the snake going down Kate Capshaw's shoulder, and Indy being super freaked out by it, and then her just thinking this entire time it was the elephant.
Right.
It's that same vibe, but for this time now, Indy actually has to deal with it, because if he doesn't grab the thing, he's gonna die.
Call it a rope.
Yeah. So I kind of love that, because we all have irrational fears.
Yeah, I guess. I let it go. It's just kind of a funny sequence for me. But all right, now we can get into the rest of the jungle sequence that we were mentioning before. Talking to it now. Again, we already mentioned, of course, the swinging vines. We've kind of talked about the sword fight, but the vehicle chase itself is great. And Max becoming a double agent or triple or whatever it is, it's a great moment too.
No, I just lied about being a double.
Yeah, like no, I lied about being a double. Like no. Actually, this is what he's being double. Because he comes out, he says something, goes, "I practically told you. I practically foreshadowed. What were we in Berlin? Oh, double agents." Yeah. Double agents. Fuck. All right, fine. Then Matt's working with them again. And again, I know that's part of the reason why there's one too many turns for Mac as far as some people are concerned. But to me, it's kind of like I understand who Mac is. Mac is going to go. He's a fair team follower, so to speak. So whoever's winning is going to benefit him. He'll flip sides.
I'm a capitalist. I go where the money is.
Exactly. We get Mac back on the good side, so to speak. But it's a great fun sequence. Again, the swinging vines is a way to get Mutt back with his team, so it's kind of a plot device thing. But it is what it is.
But I do like once they're because Oxley gets the help. So to your point in all this, when Oxley gets the help and they end up in the back of the truck. One of my favorite scenes in the movie actually is in the back of the truck when they kind of start arguing about the fact that Indy was never actually around and why he and Marion weren't together, and that she had gotten with that guy, Colin, who I introduced you. I think you let go of saying who I could marry when you didn't show up at the wedding. Like, just their whole banter is really great. And again, all the stuff between Indy and Marion feels really fantastic. So when Indy gets out of the rope and he goes, there were other women, but they all had one problem. And she goes, yeah, what's that? They weren't you, honey. Like, it's so perfect.
Yeah.
And especially because, earlier in the movie, when they first get together again, Marion even makes that joke. She goes, are you still leaving a pile of wreckage behind, or have you
Right.
finally retired? Like, those little things. And then he says that to her, and she gets that smile, and Mutt is like, oh God, stop. Like, that look on Mutt's face where he's like, you, please, God, no. But
Jackass.
Marion gets smitten again, and it's like, yeah, she still loves him too. Like,
Yeah.
it was always there, right? And I love
Absolutely.
that.
This was Marion having her moment that Indiana had a couple scenes back when he sees her again for the first time at the campsite. That giddy moment, because they've always been in love. They've always had their secret. Yeah, they have their problems, but they are smitten. And then when they get out of it, Indiana starts driving, and she comes up to the front. They had that shared moment where they're both on the same page, smiling at each other, knowing what's going on. All right, and now they're like, it's like business time. Now they gotta get Oxley. We gotta get back to this. We gotta do what we gotta do now.
Yeah, and I love the. Do you think he has a plan? I don't think he thinks that far ahead. And then he popping out with that rocket launcher. I'd cover your ears if I were you. Dude, it's so good. And again, it's just like,
It's so
I
indie.
love that. Yes, it's so indie. And him blowing up the giant. I kind of love that buzz cutter vehicle, because it feels like something weirdly indie that we wouldn't see a lot of, but it also feels more like a 50s style sci-fi monstrosity vehicle that I believe in. You know what I'm saying? So I've always liked that. And people are always like, but you can clearly tell they're like, they made tracks in the jungle. And it's like, yeah, but that buzz cutter thing is literally driving everything. It's cutting everything down. I don't mind that it looks so empty.
Right.
It's a little artificial, but it is what it is. Like, I can live with that.
Right. Agreed.
The movie gives me a reason. I don't give a shit. Like, people overthink it, but I'm thinking that this series is the same series where, again, a movie ago, this knight lasted like thousands of years hanging out in a cave by himself.
Yeah.
I really don't give a shit about the rest of it. Like, please be as weird and bonkers as possible. And this is one of them. So Indy with the rocket launcher blowing that thing to hell and back. It's fantastic.
And speaking of weird and bonkers, let's get into it. I don't care. Like, again, another one of those things that people don't like. I love it. Where are we? We are at a 50s sci-fi movie.
Correct.
If you haven't gotten that by far, if you haven't understood that by now, then you're in the wrong movie at this point. You're never going to be solved. Yes, it's time for the big damn ants.
It's the big damn ants, which is, again, 1950s sci-fi movie. This is so perfect.
Yes. And it makes so much sense with this world that they've created in the 50s sci-fi frame of mind. We're going to go to interdimensional beings. We've already got a crystal skull that has psychic powers. Of course, we're getting some kind of big monster at some point. This is what happens. And Indiana Jones is famous for the bugs. We had so many bugs in Temple of Doom. This is like almost a callback to Temple of Doom in and of itself. Big damn ants, and it's a fun sequence.
Yeah, dude, I love it. And it's also, again, super fitting because all these movies have the creepy crawly things or something, right? Last Crusade has the rats.
Right.
You've got all the different bugs and things in Temple of Doom. It's obviously snakes and pretty much just snakes. Asps, very dangerous.
You go first.
Every one of these movies has their thing. And I really love that this one kind of goes in on the ant one, because also, like, we hear stories about different ant colonies all over the world, and like South American ant colonies are fucking wild. Cool. Let's explore that. Let's do a thing with that. And I love that was how it went. Like, is it again a little CGI, maybe too much? Sure, I will give you that.
When the ants are calling up each other to get to Cape Blanche and everything, it's a little, and like
that's also true.
It is true. It is true, exactly. When she kills it with her knees and the ant guts like splat on the camera. Okay, like I understand we're like, that's a little much for them, but to me it works perfectly. It works exactly what it wants to do, especially because it also serves a point in the overall Indiana Jones franchise, because we get our Indy versus well, in this case, not Pat Roach, because Pat Roach is in the first 3 films, but the big thug that he has to fight that he has no business beating. And at the end of the day, he ends up winning partially because of an outside thing. He knocks the guy down into the pile of ants when the pile of ants takes him.
I love Igor Jijinki. I totally butchered his last name, but that's who you're talking about.
Yes.
Spalko's second in command. He's also from Lost, and he's been in a bunch of other things. But I actually really like Colonel Antonon because there's something super scary about him, and
Yeah.
it is very similar to the Pat Roach fight. We get to see the Indy like doing the big swing punch that kind of misses and he falls down, and you get a lot of that same flair. And boy, dude, Igor just sells being that fucking guy. Like, he is that fucking guy. He's scary, he's big, he's gonna beat the shit out of Indy because Indy is so clearly out of his element. And that's the thing, right? The thing that we have talked about over every one of these movies that I continue to love is at the end of the day, and I think this is the thing that people misunderstand about these movies, and when they get all upset about things, again, I think it's lost on them. Indy's never been a great hero. He's good at getting out of binds, but he's not a
He's
great
a lucky hero.
He's a lucky everyman. In the same way that Jack Burton is clearly not the hero of Big Trouble in Little China. He just happens to be there. Like, that is why I always like Indy. And then Indy, at the end of the day, he like does save the day. He's lucky at doing it. He's not always great at doing it.
Right. He
But those
knows
kind of
enough to
fights-
be in the right place in the right time and to have things work out in the direction he wants them to work out.
100%. And I always liked that for it. So this scene in particular is really fun. The fight it feels very as far as this movie is concerned, it's maybe the most grounded fight in the movie, which is also very fun for it. Like, I think the chase is fairly grounded at the college. I think for the most part, other than a couple of beats, the jungle sequences overall very grounded in like the character moment combat. But this in particular feels very much like that singular moment of like the grounded Indy that people really like from the first 3 movies.
Exactly. And of course, that leads to our next spot, which is again an issue that people have. To me, it's actually very similar to Temple of Doom. We do have the duck boat going over 3 waterfalls. Okay, I admit that this is one of those kind of like, okay, especially the third one. The third one kind of like.
It's actually interesting because mine's actually not the 3 waterfalls that's the issue.
Okay.
It's the tree.
It's the tree. It's the coincidental part of the tree
for me. Yeah. That's the only moment where I'm like, it's really dumb. It does make me laugh, but it's really dumb.
Yeah, I agree with that too.
Honestly. Like, I can't be mad about it. And again, this is Marion taking options into like the situation into her own hands.
Right.
But it's a really dumb sequence. Like, just that part of it. I wish that they had just raised the water level a little bit, so it was just her driving off the cliff and landing in the water. Like, that, just a little thing like that. But again, it's not a make or break thing. It's just, it is a thing they did. It's a little bit of a dumb sequence, but I don't care. Like, it doesn't break the movie for me. I do laugh when the tree goes back and it hits a bunch of the Russians off. Like,
very Temple of Doom.
Very Temple of Doom. Again, very kind of funny. Also, I wanted to, there's a moment I wanted to go back to that we didn't talk about. And it
before you do that, real quick, I just want to say the waterfall sequence for itself. I don't think I'd mind. It's the last really huge waterfall where they all even fall out of the ship. It's kind of like that's me. I'm kind of like, all right, that's I wish they had just done the one waterfall. You kind of believe that much. It's kind of like, okay, it seems like it's like pushing. You go to the well once too many times for me.
Fair enough. Again, I will let you have that.
Okay. Yeah, go ahead.
But speaking of the duck boats, actually, and like the ant sequence, because again, we are very chaotic here. There is a moment that we should have touched on that I really like, and it's actually right before the big damn ants, and it's the moment that is actually like a shared moment again between Indy and Mutt, and that's the whoa, and they're like kind of enjoying the adventure together, and they're realizing like this is actually really good, and they're like making it work, and then the Indy going, oh, and he freaks out when he realizes he's about to jump. Like,
Yeah,
but it's a good moment. And again, because it feels like also a callback to the fact that earlier in the movie, he looks at him disapproving.
agreed. Very, very much so agreed. Absolutely. So, but
So
really, again, it's that connection that has been built in the entire film. We've got to that point now. So, the first time they really connect as father and son, knowing they are father and son.
correct. So it's just a nice moment. I like it a lot. And there's also the Mutt calling him Daddy-O earlier, which makes me laugh. I
Yeah,
always make note of that. What,
yeah, me too.
what are you looking at, Daddy-O? They're getting away. This movie's actually got a lot of really quippy one-liners. I think that's the other thing we don't talk about a lot. Like, this movie actually has a real Kraken script. And I think that gets overlooked a lot when people talk about it.
Agreed. Dialogue. So people have
Yes.
some problems with some of the story elements, but this dialogue, I don't think you can really argue the dialogue. Dialogue is there. It's very crisp, very clear. It's clever. It's quippy. It's good.
I like Ike.
Like,
You know what was funny, actually? So I was watching The Simpsons last night.
okay.
This has a point, I promise. And I was watching the season premiere of season 26, which is the one about Krusty's father dying
Okay.
and Krusty the Clown dealing with it. But there's this part where the kids are all like watching the Krusty show live, and they introduce him, and they're like, This character here's the man who's falling apart right in front of us before our very eyes. It's Krusty the Clown." And they introduce him, and he's having like this existential crisis, and he's delivering this fucking monologue in the show, and it's just like so dour, and he's saying it in front of all these children. And then you can tell everyone doesn't know what to do, so they start playing the laugh track. And then at one point he goes, no, I don't deserve the laugh track of long dead children that are no longer living, obviously. And then they play it again, and you hear this kid go, "I like Ike." I lost it. I was like, oh, that's really good.
That is really, really funny. I want to touch base on something I actually forgot to mention. I'm going to bring it way back for a second, only because you mentioned the script and the creepy dialogue and the good things that we mentioned, the callbacks they did to Raiders, a lot trying to be Raiders. There's a line going all the way back real quick to the Neil Flynn sequence where it especially hit home more on this watch than it ever had before, because it is a complete reminder of Raiders of the Lost Ark. Watching your career with great interest, with great interest. It's just a callback to Top Men.
Just that way. Yeah.
It's the same way. Top Men. Great interest.
Again, these movies this movie is a lot more like Raiders overall than most of them. Yeah. It's honestly, and then again, spoiler alert for next week without saying anything other than Dial. Dial is also very close to Raiders.
I honestly would say this film is actually the perfect combination of Raiders, Temple, and Crusade. There's
that I agree with.
Crusade. It has the father-son's moments with Indy and Mutt. You have the horror sequences of Temple of Doom that we mentioned already, and we have the adventure sequence of Raiders of the Lost Ark that it's calling back to all the time with Marion and Indy especially. So this is like a greatest hits record.
Yeah,
it is a greatest hits record.
Well, and even to your point, right? So where we're at with the movie is that they finally get to the Temple of at Akator,
right?
And there is still a sense of terror and dread here too. Like when we first start to see the people who live here, they're hiding in the walls, and they start like crawling out of spaces, and you're like, I'm sorry, what? The entire hell? Like, it's so creepy, and I love it, and I love the designs. And again, this is also kind of a callback to Raiders, like them running down through a field, being chased by a bunch of people who live in the area, and you're like, oh, that's interesting.
Right, absolutely. Some natives there with basically weapons that are trying to kill them. I was looking for Jock. That's what I was looking for at one point. Where's Jock in the plane?
Yeah, right. Because it almost feels like he should be there.
Right, absolutely. But no, and this is the great part too. This is where we get a little bit more of that Last Crusade puzzle sequence where they try to figure out where the openings are and the secret passages and everything else, how to get into the city of gold with the sand and the skulls and everything else. It's perfectly an Indiana Jones moment. That they had to slide in there, and it leads to great tension, great drama building, great action adventure moments as well.
Oh, it totally does. And actually, I love the temple design at Akator. I love how they get into it. I think that it's interesting too, because at this point National Treasure had come out a couple years before, and National Treasure is really big on the puzzle mysteries.
Yeah.
It's much
Yeah.
people think National Treasure is an answer to Indiana Jones, but it's actually an answer to the Da Vinci Code
Yeah,
in
100%.
storytelling. Because Da Vinci Code is 100% all about the plot-based mechanics
Like
of puzzles.
mystery to puzzle to mystery puzzle,
Yeah,
leading to next mystery puzzle, and your next mystery puzzle. Yes.
right. And the National Treasure movies are really big on that too. And the indie movies are actually not huge
Right.
on that. There's stuff happening, but there's a lot more action. There's a lot more
Mostly
drive
it's
in the
Last Crusade
story.
that has a little bit of that. It's in the first parts of Venice where they're leading to the
Yeah,
Knight's Tomb. That kind of stuff has a little bit of that. But you're right. More often, it's not the whole movie, which is what National
right.
Treasure and Da Vinci Code tends to do.
So this one actually feels like a little bit of an answer to that,
Yeah.
which is kind of interesting, right? Because again, you're also trying to make this for a more modern audience. So what did they do?
Right.
They really leaned in on a little bit of it. And so
Absolutely.
there is a little bit of that, which is kind of
Well,
actually fun.
it kind of feels like Halloween H2O, having somebody
Yeah,
watching Scream on the TV.
right.
Is that kind of like, it's, we understand you're of the same ilk to a degree.
Yeah,
We'll give you some
right.
love the same way, kind of thing.
Yeah. Oh, that's 100% accurate. I hadn't even thought about that. Yeah, that is absolutely it. So it's very clear that they're also kind of doing that because Da Vinci Code at that point is super popular. National Treasure had made a shit ton of money.
Right.
Well, what both of them were out, I guess, at that point
Yeah.
because the second one's 07.
Yeah.
So yeah, all right. So both of those were out at that point. And actually, interestingly enough, they're also looking for El Dorado
Yeah. It's pretty
in
funny,
the
actually.
second National Treasure,
Yeah.
because they're also looking for the City of Gold, and they also end up in like a underwater temple. And there's a lot more similarities there, I think, than most people realize. It's just very interesting, even down to Nicolas Cage's mom ending up being a professor.
Yeah, you're not wrong. You're absolutely not wrong.
So
In
just kind
fact,
of fun.
you could actually switch out Ed Harris with Ray Winstone and be like a similar kind of thing.
Yeah, right. I mean, I'm just saying it's kind of there.
Yeah, why not?
But I really love this last sequence because my hot take is I love the reveal of
I
the
do too.
interdimensional beings. I think it's so cool and it's so good, and the villain death is exactly the kind of villain death I want from these movies, and it works, man.
They set you up for it the entire movie. It's just like it's not a surprise reveal. It's like a reveal that has been like laid out from the framework of the movie and from the time frame that we're in. This has been a 50s sci-fi the entire time. What is it going to be again? It's going to be interdimensional beings and aliens. That's what's got to happen at this point.
Yeah.
If it didn't be that way, it would almost be disappointing. It'd be kind of like a ripoff to a degree. I
Honestly,
do love that ending. I love
me
the
too. I do too. And I also love that in the same way that every one of these villains has it wrong about what
whatever it
this
is.
artifact is, because
Right.
every single one of them thinks that they are going to get like all this power or anything. And Spalka was right. She could have her going there was the right move because all she wanted was knowledge. Knowledge is their power. The thing is that she can't handle it. She can't handle all that,
Exactly.
and that's why they kill her.
Exactly. And that's the great part about it is Indiana Jones in the history of the movies, Indiana Jones doesn't defeat the villains. The villains defeat the villains. This is part of the same thing throughout. I mean, you could argue Temple of Doom, obviously, with Molarami on the bridge. There's a bit of that. But Belloc defeated by his arrogance.
Yeah.
Donovan defeated by his arrogance.
Yeah, and then you look at
Falco
again,
defeated
yeah,
by her
Spalko
arrogance.
defeated by her
Defeated by her
arrogance. And then, I mean, I'll just say it now. This is not a spoiler alert, obviously, if you haven't seen it, but even Dial of Destiny, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
Defeated by arrogance. Like that was what it was.
Arrogance. And by the way, I got to throw in there. I could not run a Holy Snopes Star Wars podcast without throwing in the moment where I just literally jumped in the scene.
Oh yeah, I know exactly where you're going. I've got a bad
Harrison Ford of all people. Harrison Ford. We did not know at this point he's coming back as Han Solo. That's actually years away still. This is not about Lucasfilm. This is not in the realm of possibility. For one last time, it was almost like Harrison Ford goes, I gotta say goodbye to Indy this way. I might as well be in here. Let me say goodbye to Han Solo as well for the fans. I got a bad feeling about this.
Oh, dude, I lost it when that happened the first time. It made me so happy. I was like,
So
yes,
happy.
just yes. And I love that the alien design is just like a typical gray alien. I'm so
Yes.
glad they didn't try to change the look. Like it just being a 50s gray alien is so perfect. And dude,
With the
that
big head.
shot of the skulls as they start to come together
Oh,
across
it's
and
awesome.
like, uh, I I lose my mind every time I watch it. I just think it's so goddamn cool.
Me too. Me too.
And
And it doesn't explain everything, and it doesn't need to explain everything. That's the great thing about it. There's a little bit of mystery to it, and we're okay with that as the audience. You should be okay with that as the audience because it's never been about that.
yeah,
The MacGuffin is what it is, a MacGuffin. Everything else is the more important thing. Like the relationships, the family members, the adventure. That's what Indiana Jones is about, not necessarily the MacGuffin.
right, exactly. And they clearly, you know, really lean on that with this one because I do think that maybe it goes a step too far showing the UFO at the very end. I can understand why people don't love that. It doesn't really bother me, but it is also like I didn't necessarily need to see it
Yeah,
because
yeah,
I
I
already
agree.
saw the little gray man. Like I'm
Yeah,
good. So in that regard, like that's fine. It is what it is. But I also like that it comes down to at the very end is like Indy, to your point, it's not about the alien. It's not about the gold. It wasn't about any of that. It was about, hey, look at this. I found the love of my life. I found out I had a son and I got my friend back. Like at the end of the day, this adventure was about finding a family again. And I really love that.
yeah. I mean, that's what it is. It's reuniting with Marion, getting to meet his son. It just feels like this is. I mean, granted, we know now that Dial Destiny is coming or has come out. Whatever. At the time, I feel like they really pretty much this was
We all
supposed to be
assumed.
wrapping it up. That's what we all thought. I think that was actually kind of the intention.
I do
I think
too.
it was only afterwards that they kind of went, well, maybe we could do one more because everything's set up this way. So exactly your point. You're set up to have that happy ending. Okay, Harrison Ford has one great. Indiana Jones has one great last adventure, and he ends up with his family.
Right. Well, because, similarly, you can't think of a better ending than riding off into the sunset. And we all admit that. Like that
Right.
ending is a perfect ending. Like that's a perfect
Right.
ending to a perfect movie. It
Right.
is. But
Absolutely.
if you're going to take this a step farther and come back from that ending, the only thing that makes sense is to make sure that Indy leaves with his wife. And
hundred
you know what I
percent.
mean? Like, he finds that family, he finds Marion again, and I think that that's why I really love this movie, and, like, going back to it, I'm always okay that they reopen that door because I think that we're actually getting something out of the character that you aren't necessarily getting from the other ones, and so to push him into that place where he has found that family because, again, in all of the lore of Indy to this point, across the board, between the Young Indie Chronicles, the books, the comics, the movies, the games even, Indy's always kind of a solo show, man. Like, yeah, Marcus and Sala are around. Yeah, every once in a while you see characters you might recognize from other things, but at the end of the day, he's estranged from his father. His mother is dead. He lost Marion. He has no family. Marcus is gone. Like, the more you start to realize that, the more that this movie actually is really great because yes, the argument can be made that also Last Crusade ends that way. He
Yeah.
finds the family and they ride off into the sunset. But if you're gonna open that door again and it's hey, by the way, some of these characters have passed on and he never got the love of his life back, to open that door and give him that family and to give him that like shot in the arm to have that person, I think that that's really great. And I think
Yeah.
that that's a very fitting at the time finale for the character.
Right. Absolutely. I mean, that's the way they have to do it, and it's the way they have. And I mean, Dial Destiny has the same. I'm not going to get into that again. Again, we're saving our Dial. That we keep wanting to get into Dial Destiny.
I know it
We
well
will.
because it keeps edging up on it. That's the
Right.
like there's so much I want to say, but
There's
similarly, yes,
actually
I do
similar
not.
things that go along with that. They also have a successful way of doing it. But yeah, exactly. This is what sets it up. Harrison Ford as Indiana Jones, getting his last hurrah, getting that family back. Yeah, you have to take it away from him. to give it back to him, and they do that successfully in this one.
I 100% agree, and I love the wedding sequence.
Yeah,
I
let's
do
get into
wish,
that. I love that.
I do wish that there was a few more people from his past. Like, I actually think it's a little bit bullshit that John Davies
I'm
said
sad
no.
that
He said he thought that his,
yeah.
like him saying that he deserved more out of a more substantial role. Like, I get it, but like at the same time, it's a little bit of a bummer that Salah's not there. It's a bummer that we don't see like Short Round. In there was
Willie.
a world where some of that could have happened.
Even Willie could have been there.
Yeah.
I understand maybe the argument would be you don't want Indy's ex-love there, right, to be there. But yeah, I agree. I really wish John Rhys Davis had said yes. I kind of understand what he meant. I kind of think he felt slighted. Like, because Salah had such a great role in Raiders of the Lost Ark and had a sizable enough role in Last Crusade to have him just appear as a one-scene cameo was probably almost an insult to a proud man. But at the same time, as that proud man, I would look at it like I was lucky enough to be in two of these great films that have touched so many people worldwide. And I owe even part of my career, partially at least, to being Salah and Raiders of the Lost Ark. For the fans, I can come back for one scene just to come back and say goodbye. Because you think that we think this is it. So I would like to have seen Salah too. I would like to have seen Willie come back. I would, relationship be damned. It's fine. I think Harrison Ford could have dealt with it. Short Round obviously wasn't in play at the time. I think he was pretty much done acting. I think it probably wasn't even a thought in Steven Spielberg's mind. If he had continued acting, I bet you might have seen that offer thrown out there. But yeah, I agree. It's a little short base. I mean, because you look out, you see Ox, you see Jim Broadbent. You're kind of like, oh, so it's all the new characters. So it kind of felt like a little bit chintzy,
But again, it's not a bad thing. It's just I would have loved to see a few of the others, and but that's okay. Like at the end of the day, I'm still happy with it. At least they, I would have understood if they had had Sean Connery's Force Ghost. You know what I'm saying? Like, if that had been a thing, I get why people would have been mad. Yeah. But it doesn't do that, so I really don't care.
Right, exactly. But let's go to that very big ending where they troll the trolls, and just like everybody who had said, "Oh my God, Mutt's taking over the series. Oh my God, Mutt's taking over the fedora." They actually give you that tease as a joke. The wind blows in, the fedora flies down the aisle, and Shia LaBeouf picks it up, goes to put it on his head, and Indy grabs it and is like, There's only one Indiana Jones, and he walks out with it. I loved that. That got me a big applause. Because as much as I am someone who loved the Mutt character, I didn't want to see Mutt putting on a fedora and becoming Indiana Jones Jr. either. I didn't want to see that. So this was a great way to end it. Nice little touch.
Oh yeah. Well, and it's also the smirk, the moment that he picks it up and he puts that hat on, and just that little smirk on his face, man.
Yep.
And
it is.
It's so because it's so indie, and he knows he's the only one meant to wear that damn hat, right?
One size fits one at this point. That's what it is. So
yeah, man, I love this ending overall. And again, even Williams, like if you stay through all the credits, or you're just listening to the score at home, like he also thought this was the last one. So like when you listen to it all the way through, the way that he does the Raiders March at the very end of the movie is very different. Like it's a goodbye.
Yeah.
And it feels very much like this is it. We're done now.
It kind of felt like, actually, honestly, John Williams' score at the end of Revenge of the Sith.
Yeah, 100%.
It was the same type of thing. It's funny enough they both get another go at saying goodbye.
Right. But it's just kind of funny. Like you can tell everyone involved assumed that this really was it. Like there was not going to be another. And, at the end of the day, sure, we did get one more, and I'm very happy that we have these 5 movies and the show and the comics and everything. But if it had ended here, I would have just as easily been fine with it, because it does feel right. It does feel
happy enough. Absolutely it felt right. And spoiler alert, Dial Destiny has a good ending as well, as far as I'm concerned. So I don't want to get too much of that, but yeah, I think it's a very happy ending for Indy here, and I would have been just fine if we never had another Indiana Jones movie. And to me, it would have been a perfect 1 through 4 saga, and it would have been completely okay. We know that it was supposed to end well. We know that the ending of 3 was probably the most perfect of all the endings. But considering how perfect the ending of Crusade was, to have endings that even approach that level and be that satisfying is a victory in and of itself.
Oh, I 100% agree, and it's funny because, I've been thinking about this a lot, this year just in general because, we just had Picard, which did its 3-season ending, but it was also not just ending Picard. It was
Right.
ending Next
Next
Gen. It
generation.
was
Right.
and we'd already ended Next Gen.
Right.
Like, you were hard pressed to come back from
Yeah.
the ending of Next Gen because it was so perfect, and then the movies happened, and at least 3 of those movies are good to very good, but then that last movie is so bad that you never wanted to leave that character. Like, you don't want to
Yeah.
leave the characters like that. Then you start to watch Picard, and Picard is kind of fine,
Right.
but then Picard season 3 is so great, and the fact that its ending rivals the original ending of Next Gen is kind of remarkable. And I feel the same way in how Indy 4 and Indy 5 feel to how Picard season 3 feels. I never necessarily needed it, but I'm glad it exists and it gave these characters the ending that they actually deserve.
100%. 100%, man. Absolutely. Well, I think that actually might wrap us up. Do you have any last thoughts you want to say about the film or anything else?
No, I mean, look, it's funny. This ended up, I think, being the longest one of all 4 of these, which is, again, not
Really?
super surprising because we kind of knew going into this that this was going to be the one where we really went and like planted that flag on that hill, and it was like, this is going to be out there for everyone to know that we really like love this movie. And I think that it's really more misunderstood than it is actually like viewed properly. And
Absolutely.
so the fact that we got to do this has been really cool. And I like being able to try to show people why it actually makes sense and why it works. This is not supposed to be the 30s serial film. It's supposed to be the
Oh,
50s sci-fi, you know,
100%.
adventure film. And that's a very different thing. Does it have some of the beats that you know? Sure, absolutely. But it also needs to be its own thing. And as long as you can actually get on its wavelength, it's really not different than the first 3. It may be tonally a little different, but what it's doing and what it's saying, it's just with the others, man. Like, it just clicks, it works, and it makes sense.
I'm all on board with that, and I agree 100%. And I knew this was going to be the longest episode. It's actually longer than the film, which is fine. Our defense is strong. I think if you've reached this point of the podcast and you're not on board, well, I can't help you. I can't help you. Go your own way, live in peace, but know that you are missing out on a great Indiana Jones movie if you have opened up your heart to it and then see what we see. So yeah, I'm really, really, really happy this has actually turned out exactly how I wanted it to turn out. I feel like we've done a great job as far as like showcasing the greatness of this movie and what we're missing. Yeah, I love it. I love it.
I'm really glad that we're on the same page. I mean, I assume that we're both rating it on the higher end of
Yeah.
what people might be anticipating. But
I was about to get into that. It's time to rate this episode, rate this installment.
I wanted to say that before you tried to move on, and we didn't get.
I
to
didn't this time. I wasn't going to do it this time. Actually, I had remembered. Although,
Uh-huh.
quite frankly, 100%, 100% honesty, I was getting the patron list up because I always read off my patrons at the end, and I didn't really completely think of it, but I had remembered it before you said it. So I want to take my flowers as they were. I was going to do it. That's fine. Let's get into our ratings. We always rate things on a scale of 1 to 11 here on PLD Projects. Our last film rankings, we had Raiders of the Lost Ark. I had as a perfect 11. You had as a perfect 11. Temple of Doom, we both had at 10.5. Last Crusade, we both had as an 11. My friend, what number out of 11 do you give Indiana Jones and the Kingdom of the Crystal Skull?
10.5. It is
10.5.
not any different for me than Temple of Doom overall at the end of the day. Not enough for me to ever look at it any differently, at least. I mean, again, I do think it has its problems, but most of those problems I'm very easy at overlooking considering the situation, considering how it ended up coming together. And at the end of the day, I just think it's a damn fine movie. I really do. And I had just an absolute joy whenever I watch it. And I think it stands up with those original 3. I don't think it I don't think it's even nearly as off the original 3 as so many seem to think. Like I said, I think it could be better than Temple of Doom depending on the day, on in what mood I'm in. Like, Temple's a very specific watch comparatively, where this one is the best of all 3. And I can just sit down and put it on, and I think that matters in talking about it and how I look at it. And so it just makes sense to me. So for all its problems, quote unquote, if you will, this is a easy 10.5 for me.
Okay. I will say I'm actually going to take my son through the Indiana Jones films soon. We got to the point where we're rewatching Star Wars. First of all, getting through all Star Wars, and I'm going to take him through all 5, and he's never seen any of them. And he's kind of I've had him on the background, so he's seen actually watching them. So I'm very curious because I think the one thing the Temple of Doom has on the Crystal Skull is nostalgia. Is that sense of it's the young indie doing young indie things,
Sure.
and that's part of it. To me, I will say ranking this out of 1 out of 11. This is the first time that we are not on exactly the same page. We have a little bit of different score. We were completely on board with Raiders, Temple, and Last Crusade. You give Crystal Skull a 10.5. I'm giving it a 10. So it's not really that far off. I do think it is. I do hold a little bit Temple of Doom in a little bit higher regard at times. But still, like I said, it was a spoiler alert from the very beginning. I said it's my least favorite of the 4, but you're talking about a 10 out of 11 is my least favorite of the franchise at this point. That says something. So we're both pretty much on the same level at this point as it goes. 0.5 being the complete difference of the entire franchise. So that's pretty good. I'm very happy with this film. I do think it fits right in with the first 3. I think it's a great ending. I think it's a great showcase of where indie is at the time. It's a different age for indie, but that's okay. And as long as you watch the movie that it is showing you without any of your preconceived notions, I think you'll find it's a good watch.
I 100% agree with you.
What a
fucking picture.
Yeah. All right. We are there. All right, guys. Thanks so much for watching. I know this is one of the most anticipated by people who wanted to know our In Defense of the Crystal Skull episode was coming out. So it is now out. We'll be coming back next week, early next week. You're watching this on Saturday, I believe. So on Tuesday, we will watch our deep dive into Indiana Jones and the Dial of Destiny. A lot more to say about that.
As PJ would say, in defense of Dial of Destiny, to all you fucks out there who are being way too hard on this movie.
That's true. Some people are being hard. It's an interesting view because I think there's been some mixed views. There are some. I feel like there's more of us for Dial of Destiny than there was for Kingdom Crystal Skull. But there is definitely a ton of people out there that seem to have missed what the movie was trying to say.
Gee, 2 in a row.
2 in a row. Absolutely. If this is your first time here, hopefully you enjoyed it. Click that like, click that subscribe.
And if you didn't, that's fine too. Look, you may have just come here to hate watch us because we like the movie, and
that's okay.
That's okay. Like, thanks for the view. We appreciate you, or we don't. But thanks for being here regardless.
Absolutely. And if you want to support the channel further, patreon.com/PLD projects. You can join people like Austin Cattell, Jeremiah Morris, Matty Kearns, Brandon Buckingham, Jeff Alterman. Couldn't really do this without you guys. Really appreciate you helping keep the lights on. Got a lot of great stuff coming up on PLD projects. But first, folks, where can the folks find you, PJ?
Twitter and Instagram, PJ_Campbell. You can find me. Oh, and Threads now, also at PJ_Campbell, because it seems like every day as the sun continues to cycle that Twitter gets more and more unbearable. So we're all finding a new world in Threads, apparently. So thank you, Zuckerberg, I guess, ? Who also, yeah, it is what it is. The lesser of 2 multi-billionaires in life.
Yeah.
But, doing the thing, and then, hanging out here, talking movies and stuff with this gentleman. That's right. And you can find me same place every other week. We do a bi-weekly podcast of this 2 Mediocre White Dudes on film. After we do Dial of Destiny on Tuesday, on the 25th, we will be starting the John Wick franchise, going through the 4 installments in John Wick. I feel like I just watched them, but I'm going to watch them again to do a deep dive. I can't wait to get into that. Matty Gunner is petitioning us to be on the John Wick Chapter 4 episode, so we'll have to take a look at that potentially. Maybe as a guest spot or something potentially. We'll have to see. We've never done before. We've never done before at this point. But anyway, we have, since my illness, we have a lot of podcasts we're kind of catching up on. Obviously, you're watching this on Saturday.
Mr. Possible Declassified that I did with Matty Gunner. Matty Gunner's show that actually I co-host with him. He's the lead host on that one. You saw Rogue Nation Deep Dive came out yesterday. Our Fallout episode, Mission Impossible Fallout episode, will come out on Sunday. And then on Wednesday, Maddie and I will be doing our Mission Impossible Declassified on Dead Reckoning Part 1, which I'm going to see on Monday. Beyond that, we have a weekly podcast, Holy Snokes, a Star Wars podcast, finally coming back to this Thursday special day because of the Dead Reckoning episode. We'll have Holy Snokes on Thursday and then back to its regularly scheduled weekly appearance on Wednesdays. We have Crown Jewels every week where I go through the entire Queen catalog song by song. And of course, we are returning to review, me and Lego, talking about the V franchise, getting into the weekly series now. That's going to debut on Thursday, July 20th. And then finally, Thursday, July 27th, the first episode and installment of the Harris Dance will finally arrive. It's finally happening. I'll get through every IMDb credit of Ed Harris one by one.
I'm really sorry to all of you in advance for that one, but you know.
You'll all love it. You'll all love it. First episode is actually a very short one because it's a brief appearance on a TV show in the 70s called Gibbsville. But that's neither here nor there. But that's it, guys. Thanks so much again. Stay tuned again this Tuesday again, short weekend. And then we'll be back to talk Indiana Jones and the Dial of Destiny. Until then, stay mediocre, my friends, and never underestimate the power of mediocrity.
Bye.